as always. Planning Commission meeting of April 21st, 2021 will come to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Secretary will call roll, please.
Commissioner Hodge,
Here.
Commissioner Rice,
Here.
Commissioner Gray,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Tolson,
Here.
Chairperson Mann.
Here. May I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Chairperson, I would like to move new business item 11B to before item 11A.
Okay, do I have a second to the motion to modify the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, motion was made by Commissioner Rice with a second by Tolson. Unless there's any objections, the agenda stands as modified. I have a motion for approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Motion, sorry, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Commissioner Tolson and a second by Commissioner Gray. Unless there are any objections, the minutes are approved. The Secretary will read the declaration of conflict.
If any member of the Planning Commission may have a conflict of interest or any reason why that member must abstain from consideration of any matter on this agenda, he or she should so declare at this time.
Are there any declarations of conflict? Hearing none, we move on. Public statements. This is the time allotted for public statements or comments on all items other than public hearing items. Due to the closure of the city by Executive Order N2920, public statements are to be submitted in writing or by email prior to 5 p.m. today and submitted into the record and not read during the meetings. Are there any mails received after 5 p.m. today? Okay.
Did we receive emails after 5 p.m.?
Sorry. Did we receive any emails before 5 p.m. to be read into the record?
Yes, I'll carry that in correspondence. We received correspondence under item 8, which had been provided to the Planning Commission via email and provided to you here at the dais. As far as public statements go, we have no Zoom public statements at this time.
Okay. Looks like we've already done 8 correspondence, unless we have any other correspondence to address.
No, just the 2 sets of supplemental packets.
Okay. Consent calendar. We have an item on the consent calendar. May I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar?
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Motion is made by Commissioner Rice. May I have a second?
Second.
We'll go with Commissioner Gray for that one. Motion was made by Commissioner Rice, the second by Commissioner Gray. Unless there's any objections, the consent calendar stands approved. New business. Let's see, there's no script officially for that one. Let's see what I got here. New business, we have a housing element update 2021 through 2029. Informational presentation number 3. I'm assuming staff will be making the presentation.
Yes, Chairman Mann, members of the Planning Commission, I'd like to introduce Environmental Services Director Stratus Peros to the lectern. He will introduce the housing element team and be part of the presentation tonight. Stratus?
All right. I'll let him get set up here first.
And while you're getting set up, I excuse myself for not introducing on the dais today, I think for the first time, in quite a long time. We have Sean Gibson, Deputy Environmental Service Director, City Planner, has come from the audience area up to the dais. So welcome onto the dais.
Thank you
Okay.
for letting me come up here.
Back to you.
All right, where he belongs. Okay, very good. Well, good evening, Chairman Mann and all the commissioners and the public. This is the third housing element workshop for our housing element update process. And tonight's topic is we will be discussing potential sites and potential zoning and other program changes to our housing element and to our general plan. And with that, we'll have some familiar faces. I will be here along with Associate Planner Eric Chen, representing the city for the housing element team presentation. And also joined with us tonight will be Lily Rudolph from Rincon Consultants and Veronica Tam from Veronica Tam and Associates. They've been here at the previous workshops, and they're going to be joining us here tonight to assist in the presentation. So as far as an agenda for tonight's presentation, we have our workshop overview, and we'll be breaking it down to about these three general areas. First is we'll have a presentation on housing obligations and discussion of the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also known as RHNA. This is the number that's been assigned to the city, and a little bit of what the number means and the different categories that we'll be filling in our housing element update. There will be strategies to meet the RHNA, how we can divide up the number in a number of different ways to meet our housing element goal. And then we'll be concluding with a compliance with state law, zoning amendments, and new programs will be discussed by Veronica Tam. What I'll also do tonight is discuss some of the, at the first two previous workshops, we heard a lot of public testimony from the public about the types of housing development that they were interested in, housing on commercial arterials, in commercial areas, mixed use, SROs. We heard support for single family and attached housing and for all levels of income. And so what we're gonna do tonight in a little greater detail is identify some of the geographic areas in the city where we think this development can and will occur. And again, these are just one more step before we get to the very draft housing element. Nothing's being decided tonight, but based on what we've heard at the previous meetings, we think it's a very close step to meeting some of our RHNA housing obligations. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Veronica Tam, who's going to be discussing now in detail the housing obligations for RHNA this year, or for tonight.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stratus. So let me move something after. Okay. Regarding the regional housing needs allocation, in the previous presentations, we talked about the housing element and that the housing element has to go to the state for review of compliance with state law. The most critical component of that review is the regional housing needs allocation and how the city is able to accommodate that. The regional housing needs allocation is a share of the region's housing growth that the city of Simi Valley has to be responsible for, not necessarily the growth that is within the community, but growth that that you're responsible for as part of the region. The RHNA process starts from the state level. It projects how much growth is needed statewide for the next 8-10 years, and then is allocated into the regions in the state. The city of Simi Valley in Ventura County belongs in the SCAG region, Southern California Association of Governments, which is a 6-county region, Los Angeles, Riverside, Orange, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Imperial. And within the whole SCAG region, we got allocated a very large RHNA, 1.34 million units. And for Ventura County, as one of the smaller counties in the region, we got a 24,000 unit RHNA. So SCAG also take that countywide data, RHNA, and allocate it in jurisdictions within the county. So this chart also shows how the city of Simi Valley compares to some of your neighbors, your most comparable to Thousand Oaks in terms of the RHNA, but essentially the RHNA is much larger this round for virtually everybody. Next slide. What the RENA does is it actually is divided into 4 income categories: very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. And what you have to do is make sure that you have adequate sites in with development standards and appropriate densities to facilitate and encourage a range of housing for different income groups. And this is the income distribution we're looking at. In terms of your RENA, your regional housing needs allocation is more evenly spread across the 4 income categories. It's a little bit opposite from the city's current income distribution, which has more on the above moderate income. The concept of the regional housing needs allocation is to give you allocate a larger lower income RENA to jurisdictions that currently have a larger above moderate income households, with the goal that over time that you would the RENA process would bring the jurisdictions closer to the regional average. We'll explain to you also to how what these income distribution means when it comes to RENA. The next slide. Next. So in meeting the regional housing needs allocation, we talked about you must identify adequate sites to facilitate and encourage the regional housing needs allocation for all income groups. Now, you could get credits. You can, if you're able to meet your RENA right now with all the productions and entitled projects, you can meet it with production. But if you're not able to meet it for, with production at the time of your writing the housing element, you must demonstrate that there is capacity for the housing to occur should the market calls for it. So with that, the state also allows you to count for projects that are being entitled right now that will be built in the next 8 years or so. And it also allows you to count accessory dwelling units. So with that, you take it off from your RENA, and then what is your remaining RENA? Then you must identify adequate sites through development standards and proper zoning. Next slide. So just kind of break it down for the city of Simi Valley, how we're doing it. Again, your regional housing needs allocation is about 2,800 units divided into income categories. What the income categories means is that in that kind of, we have density that would facilitate and encourage lower income housing, for example. It doesn't mean that you're building the units at that income level because you don't control the market, you're not a developer, but you're providing sites at that type of density that would encourage or facilitate affordable housing for lower income households without a lot of subsidies. And at maybe moderate, medium density, you can facilitate moderate income housing. And when we talked about above moderate income housing, that's primarily, and you have to be at least, single family homes could probably be the above moderate income housing, but we are using density as a proxy to measure what is feasible in a community. With the regional housing, can we turn back to the previous slides? With the regional housing needs allocation being 2,800 units, we do have the ability to meet about 1,000 units with entitled projects that will not be pulling permits yet. We also have projects that are under review in the approval process that gets us about another 587 units. Based on historical trends of accessory dwelling units, we think we can get credit for about 400 units. So with all these credits alone, we've met the majority of our regional housing needs allocation, particularly in the moderate and above moderate income categories, but we are not able to obviously meet the lower income categories yet. So the focus on finding sites is in finding sites for the lower income RENA. And there is a requirement that would put a buffer in in the sites, because a lot of times projects don't come in exactly at the same density or income level that we're projecting. So you need to have some kind of a buffer to allow that kind of loss in site capacity. Essentially, this housing element is looking for sites for about 980 units for the lower income. Next slide. So identifying for sites for the RHNA, I think this is where Stratus is going to talk about, but we definitely need to look at sites that currently are available through the, but we don't have a lot of vacant sites. So we're primarily looking at non-vacant sites that can be recycled into higher density housing. And some of the key areas that are being looked at are major, like 4 areas in the city that's listed in here. But Stratus is going to talk a little bit more detail where the sites are and why the city has chosen some of those potential areas for recommended RHNA strategy. So I'm going to turn this over to Stratus right now.
Okay, so what we're going to be doing is showing some of the areas here that through rezoning, we might be able to accommodate that about 900 to a 1,200 number that Veronica was just describing. So this is the our previous housing element cycle for what we call the 5th cycle. That's the one we're currently in right now. And during this time, this is kind of a report card of what we've done well over these past 7-8 years. And you can see in pink, those are some of the projects that have been approved. On the left is the Land C project. That's the one over at Los Angeles and Madera. Those are the townhomes that are under construction and almost complete that project. And the pink one in the middle there along Sycamore is the Park District headquarters site, which is also just beginning construction. And that's a combination of 99 senior apartments and about 211 market rate apartments. Tapo and Alamo was approved, so that could be a pink one up there at Tapo and Alamo, and of course the SRO project that we've done recently along Tapo Street. But what the 5th cycle also shows is these are some of the areas that were designated in the 5th cycle. Maybe these were given a mixed-use overlay or some other hope that they would develop, but we really haven't had any projects in there. So we'll be talking about some of the code updates, hopefully, that we can do to maybe improve our mixed-use overlay to get development in those areas. And I don't know if Veronica was going to do these ones, Eric, or if we're going to get into mine. So Veronica, I think if you're still there, we'll have you do this slide in the next few, and then we'll get to my own.
I think I turned it over to you a little too soon. Sorry about that. Yes. Identifying the sites of the RHNA, there are certain requirements that we need to comply to, and back in 2017, the state has adopted a new law called AB 1397, and that established a lot of more stringent criteria compared to the previous cycle or the current cycle of housing element. One thing is 50% of the lower income sites should be in residential zone and try not to be in mixed use zone. So you cannot heavily rely on mixed use, and mixed use sites could be selected if it does allow for standalone residential, or that it's not or that the mixed use does not require more than 50% of the square footage to be non-residential. So they prefer that you don't rely on mixed use, but if you do rely more than 50% of your lower income in mixed use, the only way you can do it is that the mixed use has to allow for standalone residential, and not more than half of the square footage can be non-residential. The minimum standard is that the density has to be 20 units to the acre. And the sites must be large enough that it accommodates 16 units. So you cannot give them a bunch of little sites that can do 2 units, 3 units, and 4, 5 units. That because of density, it meets the density standard, but because of the size of the lot, you're only creating small like duplex, triplex, which is not feasible for affordable housing construction. The other requirements for that too is that we have to allow by right development on projects that include 20% affordable. So these are all the requirements because currently the city of Simi Valley doesn't have enough sites that would qualify for low income sites at the density and location that we're talking about. So we're going to have to rezone as part of the, we're going to have to propose to rezone as part of the housing element. And in order to qualify for the rezone, these are the criteria that we have to follow in the housing element and in the rezone program in the future. Next slide. So I think this is now we turn it back to Stratus.
And what I'll do is I'll start from the west side of the city, and we're going to move ourselves over to the east side of the city as we talk about some of these areas. And I think what Veronica was just mentioning, you know, we're not just looking at the commercially zoned areas today, but rather maybe some of these residentially zoned areas that we might be able to increase today. But there is a plan, perhaps between Erringer to Sinaloa along Los Angeles Avenue, to make that a specific plan corridor. Already the north side of Los Angeles at First Street has a mixed-use overlay, and we're looking at applying that to the south side of Los Angeles Avenue, and actually all the way over to Sinaloa and to Erringer. So that's the commercial area. But as far as residential zoning, we heard from the earlier public speakers about support for duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. We've heard for support for, you know, more multifamily. We've heard support for more SROs, mixed-use development. We've heard support for single-family and attached housing options as well, and something for all income levels, from, you know, the very low to very high. And so what we're looking at is in this area of town. And Jen, I don't know if you have a laser pointer or something over here, but okay. This is at Los Angeles and Sinaloa, and the big red up there, that's the Stater Brothers Shopping Center. Thank you, Wendy. And so that's always a good anchor for looking at areas where we're trying to increase density, creating an area with pedestrian connectivity where people could walk easily to the shopping center that's, let's say where Stater Brothers is located. And so the area that we identified for potential rezoning are a few parcels. This is what we call our Old Town area. And this is a neighborhood of a lot of single-family homes, and there is some multifamily residential development, high density, right in that location. And then over here is a high-density property. That's actually one of our church parcels with one of the community gardens located on it. And so the reason this area has potential is because it could go the next increment of zoning upward, what we call the medium-density neighborhoods here, could be potentially upzoned. And that could accommodate duplexes, triplexes. Already these houses could be constructed with single-family homes and ADUs. But for that duplex option, this is a neighborhood that I said always has good bones. It has the alleys in the neighborhood, and it makes it easy for carriage houses over garages or other ways to really take advantage of the alley development and some of those empty rear yards. So that's an area. Parishioner housing adjacent to a church, that's also a good potential. And then some even our older multifamily development, with the right zoning, perhaps would encourage redevelopment potentially if they wanted to take advantage of a higher density level. But looking down here, we have a potential for 606 dwelling units on 141 parcels. Now, what that means is a lot of these parcels are already spoken for. They're not going to change. But if the whole area were to build out, then there is the potential that we could get all that. But we recognize not every parcel in here is going to change, and it's unlikely someone's going to acquire the whole lot or the whole block and change it. But we do plan for infill development in a incremental fashion. The next site is familiar to the Planning Commission. This is Patricia and Haywood, and the Planning Commission has done a number of projects out in this area over the years. And what you'll notice on Patricia and Haywood is that it's a combination of both very high residential zoning in brown, and then the white is the next increment below that, high density zoning. And some of these parcels are already spoken for. We remember Chris Ituli's first millennial project right there, and this is the second millennial project there. We've done the Scott Peters apartment building and the Jerry Jacobs apartment building over here. So some of those parcels in white are already spoken for, but there is some other, good development potential. For example, the vacant lot that's at Haywood and Erringer, the former property owned by the hospital right there. And then, of course, we've seen like the Fabio Malik and the Jacques Mashihi projects over here recently at the Planning Commission. Those projects have not been built yet. But again, there are some other languishing parcels in this area where perhaps the zoning isn't getting them there currently, or the ones that have been entitled may never get built. So we do look at this area as a potential for multifamily, high-density residential development to really finish off the street. Again, this area is desirable because it's close to commercial services, it's close to transit, it's close to the Arroyo Bike Trail, it's close to the park. And so, there's a good synergy of a variety of services that are in a pedestrian manner could be accessed by these folks either by biking or walking to go to restaurants and coffee shops. So finishing off this area is a good way for us to meet our RHNA number. Again, we can get about 401 dwelling units on these 41 parcels. Next slide. We heard from certain parcels about some of our church properties, and this is what this slide represents. This is over at Erringer and Royal, and there's a church property right there at that corner. And this is just near the Grace Brethren School, this parcel right over here that's owned by the school, by the church. And we have the church here, but we also have an empty parcel on the east side of that lot. And so these could accommodate parishioner housing, and it's a multifamily residential development. Currently, the zoning is office commercial, which does not allow any residential development there. And this one is medium density, which is actually, would not allow multifamily development. But these would be, again, a special needs type of group, a parishioner housing associated with the church would make a lot of sense on those parcels. This is what we refer to as the Heineman property. This is located along Covington Avenue near Rudolph. And this neighborhood, this property currently today is got one very old house that's located here, and it's a lot of hillside and open space and natural vegetation. And when Covington was originally constructed, it actually went through this property. This little yellow actually belongs to the Heineman property over here, but it was needed to make that street connection. And what we were thinking about here, this is one of these neighborhoods or potential properties where single-family attached or single-family detached type of housing could be appropriate. Something that would be very compatible to the existing moderate density. These are attached housing units, in 2x2s along this section of Covington. And perhaps we could continue that pattern right over here on the Heineman property. Or, again, the lower density single-family residential to the south. Again, there's medium density to the north, but that's a school right there. Most of this property is undevelopable. It's got a lot of hillsides and steep slopes, but there is a flat portion on the western side along Covington that is developable, that could have some development as well as retaining the existing single-family home and perhaps another single-family home on the far east side of the property. But we're not talking a whole lot of units, but I mean, in theory, 92 could be allowed on these parcels, but in reality, it might be limited by the smaller footprint that's readily developable in this area. This site is along where Walnut and Presidio is here, north of City Hall. The Planning Commission actually saw this project not too long ago. This was the senior housing proposal. About 52 units were being proposed on this site. The proposal was to extend Presidio to connect to Walnut, to finish off Lemon Drive, and to abandon the current section of Walnut that's right here. And again, that request was for a senior townhomes. This time, what's being proposed potentially is if we were to modify the zoning of the original parcel, plus the parcel now to the east, as well as there's also a city-owned lot in this area, what it could do is result in a modified design that might address some of the concerns raised by the Planning Commission and City Council. This was the project that had a 28-foot-high wall along the street embankment that caused some concerns, the location of the driveway near that curve, and some of the other neighborhood concerns about loss of views and privacy. And what we were thinking is by combining all these parcels together, perhaps that could lower the building pad and address some of those concerns. So we felt that this site, again, would be very appropriate for single-family seniors or single-family attached or detached type of housing. Again, this is a city-owned lot, and this could be even an open space community element for the whole community. If they want to make it a dog park or something like that, it could be brought in with this to make it an amenity. And the goal here is to finish off what's intended with the general plan to get this street constructed here and to finish off the road network with the infrastructure. This is the area along Cochrane at Tapo Street, south of the 118 freeway, and a couple of different areas that have been identified here. First, we'll start with Apricot Avenue, which is on the right side of the screen. And if you notice in this immediate area, there's a combination of commercial plan development zoning along Tapo Street. There's a section of Apricot today that is already high density, and some multifamily development has already been built there. And then the other part of the street is very low density with just single-family homes. To the south is very high density, and then there's a moderate density component over here. So in the small area, you have all this multiple zoning. And why this is a good candidate is because there's already a transition occurring of multifamily. This is an area that's very close to transit. It's close to the arterial streets. And it's also close to the Santa Susana Plaza Shopping Center and this area with all the other commercial services. So by increasing the residential density here within walking distance of that commercial center, it's a good synergy of pedestrian connectivity between the two uses. And so we felt that this was a good combination. Again, whatever the correct zoning might be for this area right here is something we can discuss, but we're just identifying this as a very likely and good area for upzoning to finish off the block potentially, and again, putting higher density closer to services. On the right side of the left side of the screen is also another section of Cochrane Avenue where there's moderate density. And what you would see here today is some underutilized parcels. Some of these do have some development, some office building or other uses that are right in here, and then maybe another empty parcel here. So that it was a thought that, because these parcels are underutilized, they could possibly be consolidated in a more higher density project similar to what's on the other side of Cochrane Street or to the right here could be mirrored on this side. Again, trying to put on an arterial close to services. And then one of the biggest things we're trying to consider is how we can put more housing near our transit center, near our Metrolink. And so the Metrolink is located down here in Brown, the triangle-shaped parcel, and that's already been designated for mixed use, and that's a city-owned lot. That's the parking lot where people park when they go to Metrolink. And so when we look at that, if we draw a half-mile radius around this, everything to the south is a lot of mountain down there, so we're not going to get much housing down in that area. And to the east and west, it's already pretty much spoken for. There's industrial development and zoning to the west with single family on farther to the north. On the east side of Stern Street is already a lot of established multifamily and single family residential neighborhoods. We have the Smart and Final Shopping Center with Chi-Chi's Pizza, and we have the community park in this area. So what we're really looking at is Leeds Street, and really starting from Cochrane, west of Stearns, along Leeds. What you'll see, like for example, on Jared Court here, is some single-family homes have already been established, but there's a lot of underutilized parcels in this area. And again, when the goal is to, per state law, to bring more housing density near your high-quality transit areas, which is what our Metrolink station is, this is the one opportunity we have to do it. I mean, it'd be nice perhaps to move our Metrolink to another part of the city where it's more centrally located and around other services, but we kind of have to work with what we got. And as you're familiar with, they're doing the whole double rail line extension in our Metrolink right now. So the Metrolink site is the one we got and what we're going to be kind of committed to working with. So we're going to look at potentially if there is an area to increase residential density, it would be right in here. And that's really the one opportunity nearest our Metrolink site that we can still take advantage of. So we think this is a very good candidate for possible exploration for rezoning. And then over here, this is on Oak Road. So this is east of Yosemite, south of Los Angeles. There's a fire station here, the Vons Market to the north. And what we're dealing with, this is a 4-acre parcel, and this is one of the letters we received from the public, and it's worthy of consideration. This 4-acre parcel is currently medium density, which matches some of the single-family homes to the north. But to the west is a very high-density apartment development, and to the east is a mobile home park and other forms of denser housing. And so this project, it's always been a little bit landlocked compared to some of the other parcels that actually touch a street frontage. And so working with some creativity, whether it's an expansion of this apartment complex and an expansion of this mobile home park or its own standalone project, we do feel a rezoning here could have resulted in a little bit more multifamily density that's comparable with some of the surrounding context and is a good candidate. So again, potentially 31 dwelling units on these two parcels. And so this chart shows here, so of all the maps I was just showing to you, we were kind of estimating what would the potential capacity be and all that, and we come up with this number here of 1245. Again, we're looking at that 980 and that cushion that Veronica was mentioning too, to give us a few numbers to extra. And again, this is involving about 348 parcels. So this is all residential land. We are still have the opportunity to put a mixed-use overlay on some of our commercial corridors if we wanted to put more mixed-use housing. But to address some of the affordability issues, we had to address first these residential zones. So I'll leave it with that, and I think the next slide will turn it over to Veronica.
Thank you. In 2017, since 2017, the state has passed a lot of different housing bills. Particularly in 2017, there was a package of over 15 housing bills that influence or impact the way we do housing elements, particularly how we do housing production. All of those bills are geared towards removing governmental constraints as it relates to housing production. And so I'm going to walk you through some of these that we will have to provide. We will have to kind of map out in the housing element how the city would be pursuing those in the next year or so. The first one we kind of mentioned already, by right approval on sites that are rezoned or reused. AB 1397 basically says if you're rezoning sites, if you're reusing sites that you included in the previous housing elements as feasible sites, but they didn't get built, but you want to reuse them again in the 6-cycle housing element. Or if you do not have enough sites and you need to rely on rezone and upzoning later, and within 3 years of the statutory deadline, then those sites would be subject to by right approval if the project includes 20% affordable. So that's by right approval, not on everything, but on projects that includes 20% affordable. Density bonus, there's been a lot of changes in density bonus laws, and particularly, again, relating to affordable housing, making sure that there's like an increased density for affordable housing that's 100% affordable. You know, in general, the density bonus law is on a sliding scale. The higher the percentage of affordable units, you can get a higher density bonus at up to 35%. The latest laws actually increase the maximum density bonus to 50%. Increase and particularly for affordable housing, 100% affordable projects, you get a higher density bonus. It also provides density bonus for students housing and housing for the homeless, and all those provisions are in state law. And the city needs to be either updating the city's own density bonus ordinance to reflect state law or be consistent with state law, or some cities would just do it by adoption by reference because you have to comply with state law anyway. Next slide. Supportive housing, AB 2162. Supportive housing is basically for housing for the actually it's housing for the supportive housing for the homeless. And this is not entirely related to some of the supportive housing that we've done in the city or the zoning codes within the cities, which praise for persons with disabilities. This is permanent supportive housing for the homeless. And if they meet specific conditions, then you have to permit it by right in multifamily and mixed-use zones where housing is permitted, but it has to meet really specific conditions under the state law. If that particular housing is located within a half-mile of a public transit stop, then you cannot require minimum parking requirements, assuming that they would be taking public transportation. This, again, is state law. Another state law is relating to housing for the homeless as well, and it's really a relatively minor amendment to the existing law. The existing law governing emergency shelters was SB2 that was passed in 2007. The city has complied with that already by providing a zone where emergency shelters would be permitted by right. But this one particular amendment is looking at the parking requirements for emergency shelters. In the past, there was not a particular standard as to how you can establish parking standards for emergency shelters. But now with AB 139, it's saying that emergency shelters must be, the parking standards should be established based on the staffing level, not by the number of beds. A lot of the older times, like the shelter standards would be based on number of beds. Now they just want you to tie it to the amount of staffing that you're expected. Next slide. Low Barrier Navigation Center is another one that's relating to housing for the homeless. This is these are people who are already participating in programs that are allowing them to transition to permanent housing in the future. So these are people who are maybe going through some kind of education, life skills, financial independence, job training, rehab, a variety of programs that would allow them to ultimately transition to permanent housing. So Low Barrier Navigation Center is required to be permitted by right in a mixed-use zone that or other non-residential zone that permit multifamily housing. These are required by state law. Next slide. And in addition to these new state laws that we have to amend the zoning code to make sure that your zoning code addresses these provisions, there are some new housing programs that are also we are introducing in the housing element on top of a lot of the things that the city is doing. These are programs that are required by state law. Accessory dwelling units. You may remember that in the earlier slides that we have assumed the city would be able to get credit about 400 units of ADUs over the next 8 years. ADUs is certainly a very like focus of the latest, a lot of the latest changes to state law in the last 2-3 years, and is recognized as a very important resource for affordable housing in local community. And therefore, the state requires, AB 671 requires that the housing element provides a program to facilitate ADU development in your community. And especially if we do use the ADUs for our RHNA credits, then we need to have a monitoring kind of process to make sure that we monitor the trend of ADU development in your community. Is it consistent with the assumptions that we've put in the housing element? The other things that is required in the housing element, and that it also explains why we need to have a buffer, is because of this no net loss requirement, SB 166. The housing element in our sites inventory, we anticipate how many units we're going to be able to get from different sites and what feasibility they are for different income level. And we all know that as housing is actually being developed, it may not actually reach a particular density. It may not match what we are anticipating in the housing element. And it certainly may not match the income level either. So as your housing is being developed on your site, you need to do an ongoing assessment of whether your site inventory continue to have the capacity to meet your regional housing needs allocation. And if you do not, then you have 6 months to actually remedy that. But this requirement for no net loss is 166, and we have to have, the city has to develop some kind of a procedure to be monitoring how the site's inventory is being developed over time compared to the regional housing needs allocation.
Ms. Tam, may I ask you a question on that real quick?
Sure.
There are also project sites that, because of the inclusion of affordable housing, have density bonuses. And the most recent one that we've experienced is the one at Alamo and Tapo. And as I recall, it was a 30% increase over the maximum density that was otherwise allowed. Is that also to be considered when evaluating the existence of shortfall?
When you do evaluate and monitoring, yes, you do get to count the units that you get above and beyond what you receive as the project. We don't get to count the density bonus ahead of time. Like, we cannot automatically inflate your site's capacity by the density bonus. But as the project is developed with density bonus with the affordable units, we totally can count all of those.
All right, so I want to be clear on that. The project was approved, but yet to be developed. And so you have this similar thing here where there's a shortfall identified because here it says when the site is developed. So I guess it ultimately means that they're measuring it based upon once you get a certificate of occupancy, as opposed to when it's approved or not, or when it's approved, correct?
For the project that you just talked about, we counted every single unit and based on what they're proposed for. And so unless when they ultimately pull building permits that they built less than what they are supposed to that they have approved for, otherwise we're counting every single unit that they're being approved for.
Well, the reason I'm asking, I apologize for sort of taking you off your cadence here, but the second bullet point, shortfall in sites occurs when a site is developed at lower density or not in the same income, et cetera. So if there's a project which, for example, the Farmers Project, I would call it the Farmers Project, I don't know what else to call it, but it's going to be developed at a density that's lower than the maximum allowed. That 6-month period doesn't begin until the site is developed, or that 6-month period begins when the site is approved at the lower density. Which is it?
I believe is actually approved.
Okay.
Yeah, the 6 months starts when the project is approved.
Very good. Thank you.
Next slide. So what we are planning to do, the housing element in the previous housing element workshops that we talked about is due by October 15, 2021, supposedly adoption by October 15, 2021. And we're on track to releasing the draft housing element by about June 1st. And then it will be reviewed by the Planning Commission on June 9th. And with that, we want to make sure that we get comments from the Planning Commissioner and comments from the public so that we have the opportunity to also incorporate the comments. And once that is done, we will send the housing element to the state for their mandatory 60-day review. And during that time, we'll be working on the environmental associated with the housing element with the hope or intention to go to adoption by about September and October, September by before the Planning Commission again. So you'll see the comments that we got from the state and how we need to revise the housing element to respond to the state's comments. And then in October, we'll move on to adoption before the city council and then submit it to the state again. They have a second round of review of the adopted housing element, but that review is outside of the statutory deadline. And our goal is to meet the October 15 deadline. With that, I conclude my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions from the commission.
Great presentation. Commissioners, any questions?
I'd ask you to go to, I think it was the third slide that included the first notation of building in a 15 to 30% cushion, and it had the number of 980.
I think it's actually later.
Well, yeah, it's a few slides later.
Right.
Nope.
Next one, the strategy. Next one.
That one.
Right there.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Okay, so this item number 2, we'll see, it says,
Use your laser pointer.
yeah.
Sorry.
By the way, we can't see the laser point. The public and those of us who are remote can't see the laser pointer when it's used because we're looking apparently at, you know, the loaded document, not with the screen. So we had to imagine what Mr. Perros was pointing out. Number 2, California Housing Community Development recommends an additional 15-30% buffer of units, and then there's a calculation, and it totals 980. The units needed 980. Does that already include the 15 to 30% buffer?
We are doing a 20% buffer. The recommendation is 15 to 30. We are doing 20% at this time.
All right, then the 980 number, does that already include the 20% buffer?
It does.
Okay, so later on when there was a number, I think that went over, it was 1,200 and change. The number that we're looking for is 980 ultimately to submit to the state. Is that correct? Because
I would have.
It's the number with the buffer built in.
This, I guess I have to ask Lily, do you know the actual numbers? I think the inventory, it is a little bit more than the 980, yes. The 980 is based on 20%.
Yes, it does incorporate the buffer.
Yeah.
All right, so we're looking at 980, not 1245. The 1245 number was the maximum that was identified as something that we're looking at, but ultimately our goal is to turn to the state and say, here's our plan for an additional 980 units.
That's right.
I think what we're talking about is like at the minimum, you would want to go up with, you would want to take it to the state with 980.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I appreciate the clarity. That's the end of my questions.
No other questions?
I just wanted to I just wanted the staff to clarify for the people watching at home what by right housing is.
Good question.
And Miss Tam, I'll refer to you to see if you could answer that question first, and we'll try to fill in the gaps.
Sure. Well, the way that state law is written is that it's by right without discretionary review. And that also means that there is, it's not considered a project under CEQA. But it doesn't change the fact that the city can still do site plan review, design review, as long as those are like objective design standards. And so you can still do that, but the use and the density should not be part of the review.
So the way I understand it is those projects would not have to come to the Planning Commission.
Stratus, that would be something that for you, that would be my understanding.
Yes, that's my understanding.
So, whenever we bring a project to the planning commission or city council, that's what we call a discretionary project. When we approve something over at the front planning counter, like the ADUs, which you never see over here, but we're approving those ministerially. So when we talk about by right development, we're verifying for setbacks and zoning standards and everything else that's there, but we're just doing it at the staff level. And if it meets those standards, there's no other decisions need to be made, and we move it on.
And I would emphasize that it only applies when a project includes 20% affordable to lower income households.
Okay.
Chairman Mann, actually, I do have an additional question.
By all means, please.
Ms. Tam or perhaps Mr. Peros, there was an indication, as I understood it, that the RETA numbers are count only if you increase the density on parcels and the maximum build out on that parcel with the new zoning is less than 16 units. It doesn't count for RETA. Is that true?
It's a little bit more complex than that because we are rezoning because we do not have adequate sites today, and the city will need to rezone areas. So what would count as sites for the lower income RETA is the sites must be able to accommodate at least 16 units.
In order to get credit.
In order to credit against the lower income RETA, but you do get credit for moderate or above moderate income RETA, but we have excess sites on that.
So if a project is built and it has 10 units and it's low income 10 units, it's not 16, and therefore we don't get credit.
You do get credit if it's built. From a site perspective, you do not get credit.
Okay.
Yeah, but if it's built, if it's actually built, a unit is a unit, affordable unit is an affordable unit. It's only when you're doing an adequate site analysis for you potentially accommodating your RETA, they don't want you to count little parcels. But if you're able to build anything, like if you're able to make a 1 unit project affordable, go for it. You'll get to count it.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have any callers on Zoom on this matter?
Yes, Chairman Mann, we do have callers tonight wishing to speak on Zoom. Our senior management analyst, Julio Ramirez, and our assistant planner, James Fowler, are on Zoom tonight to field those calls.
Yes, thank you. Be unmuting Anastasia Prige. Anastasia, you're unmuted.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Anastasia Prige, and I'm a development associate at City Ventures. We're a residential and mixed-use developer and home builder focused on infill development in Southern California. And we specialize in for-sale products such as single-family detached homes, 2-story townhomes, 3-story townhomes, etc. I wanted to start off by saying thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak tonight. I really appreciate it. I wanted to just provide a developer's point of view on the housing in Simi Valley and California's housing crisis. As it is a growing concern. As the Planning Commission and Stratus spoke about earlier, the state is mandating that cities have their housing elements updated to ensure that they have policies in place that allow for the private market to have opportunities to build housing at all different affordability levels. Although the state is requiring that cities identify sites for all of these different affordable levels, such as low income, very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. The affordability level that's often forgotten is referred to as the missing middle, which would consist of units that are not deed restricted affordable, but are instead affordable as a result of the density that they are developed at. I just wanted to sort of bring that point to attention, as these missing middle units often bring young professionals or families to cities. And oftentimes those densities are what is needed in order for developers to get to a land value that would allow them to come to a deal with a property owner. So I just thought that that would be an interesting point to bring to attention when you guys are looking at different densities for sites. Additionally, I know that the city is looking at different mixed use, extending the mixed use overlays to different areas, which in our experience, we have found to be extremely beneficial in developing sites that fit with the surrounding uses and are developed at the highest and best use for that particular property. I think that in my personal experience here with City Ventures, we found that while having specified development standards in those mixed use overlays is important, it is also important to limit the restrictions to a certain extent, because if you include too many restrictions in those overlays, it can prevent developers from being able to develop a property and have that project pencil for them, and could ultimately, if you have too many restrictions, it could sort of push developers away and push development away. So I think there's a happy middle ground and balance that could be achieved. I think that Simi Valley has a great section of commercial uses that could be expanded with mixed use, but I think it is also important to not really restrict what those uses would be to too aggressive of a level. So I also just wanted to bring that to attention as well. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I am happy to answer any questions that anyone may have in terms of the different densities that certain product types tend to plot at and development standards and things of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Something I forgot to mention, if we could, make sure you limit your comments to 3 minutes each. I'd appreciate it very much. Next Zoom caller.
Wahid Akberzi, please unmute yourself.
And Joaquin, please limit to 3 minutes.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. Yes, thank you guys for your time. I think the missing middle point was quite important. Myself and my wife are working professionals, and hopefully, when these developments are made, we can be a part of that mix, so that Simi's competitive market, along with Moore Park and with Thousand Oaks. I also wanted to point out that there's I know Oak Road was mentioned on here on one of the tables in that PowerPoint. There's a 3-acre lot for sale on Oak Road, and I was wondering if that had been targeted by the consultant, the VNT consultants, and if not, potentially if that could be utilized as well. If there was some zoning there needed, potentially we could rezone that, but that the exact address is 1761 Oak Road. If there was any opportunity for the city to potentially buy some lots, we do have some quite large lots for sale that potentially we could touch on. I think that would be really helpful. But in general, I would hope we take a holistic approach with RENA and think further down than just the 980. Even maybe pushing, instead of 20%, maybe like closer to a 30% number. As time progresses, it gets harder and harder to find space. So potentially if we could look further than the minimum requirements, I think that would help us. But thank you guys for your time. And yes, potentially if you guys can answer me on the Oak Road question, and if any sort of land purchasing by the city was possible. Thank you all.
Thank you for your time. Next caller.
Rebecca Alberon, please unmute yourself.
Okay, good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please, Ms. Alberon.
Okay, thank you. I hate saying that, but it's necessary. Okay, good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Rebecca, and I am a Simi Valley resident. I have lived here for about 30 years. I try to, kind of fudge the numbers so I don't give away my age, but I am a current lead with Ventura County YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard, which is a grassroots organization that advocates for affordable housing throughout Ventura County. I took a look at the staff report, and I just want to give overall support of all the parcels that were identified in the staff report for upzoning. Rezoning allows us to embrace opportunities for affordable and safe housing, which was something that was highlighted as areas in particular need through the RHNA cycle for our very low and our low income individuals. I particularly want to make a recommendation on 3 sites that for me are important. And the first one was identified as the Los Angeles Avenue corridor. And that one is between Sinaloa Road and Erringer Road. And, you know, I live in what is identified, I guess, as District 3 for the City Council. So those are areas that, you know, I'm familiar as far as kind of my neighborhood, my side of Simi Valley. So I definitely want to see that area upzone. I feel like it is, you know, a site of opportunity to not only increase density, not touching necessarily our hillsides, but really, you know, there's main streets, and there is an ability for us to sustain that higher density population in that area. The other site for upzoning would be the Patricia Avenue and Haywood Street area, which they identified as east of Erringer Road. And that's also, you know, again, it's really close to me. And I particularly like that area because, again, it's close to, it's not very far from the freeway for those that are, you know, traveling in, for individuals that are, you know, may be concerned about traffic. I think that the freeway is easily accessible off of Erringer. There's also, you know, this great third space, the green space, which is the park, the duck park that is there. So that's it's a really great area for development, not only for that third space of folks being able to, you know, take their families there and enjoy the park, but also the greenway, the wash where people are able to walk and exercise. I think it, you know, it's really good. And then just really quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, is the third area that I, you know, I'm recommending for upzoning. Like I said, I support all the ones that are identified in the staff report, but this one I want to make sure that I make mention of, which is the Metrolink station area, because it is important that, you know, not only are we providing for areas, upzoning for areas to allow higher density, but that we're also thinking about, you know, what does it look like for an individual that's living there, and having things, facilities accessible to them, as well as public transportation is having a holistic approach to providing housing when we're thinking about the environment and the overall wellness of a person. So, you know, I did just want to identify those 3 particular areas, make my recommendation for upzoning in that those 3 areas, but overall, I support what is in the staff report as identified. Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder, 3 minutes. If you need to, set a timer on your phone, please. Thank you. Next caller.
Ben Ice, please unmute yourself.
Mr. Rice, are you with us? No, we lost Mr. Rice.
Cassandra Douglas, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Douglas, please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So my name's Cassandra Douglas. I'm a Simi Valley resident for 30 plus years. I was born here. Much like Rebecca, exactly Rebecca, I'm a lead for Ventura County YIMBY. Like she said, we advocate for affordable housing in the county. I'm calling in for my to say that I support all parcels for upzoning as listed in the staff report. SUNY needs more affordable housing, especially for very low and low income individuals. I do want to echo Rebecca on the upzoning on Patricia and Haywood. I live right there. This area is such a good area. It's walkable to different stores, to food, to the park. We have the wash right behind here. It'd be nice to see more affordable homes in this area. I again would like to echo the Metrolink area. We do need higher density in that area with accessibility to facilities and transportation. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Next.
Judy McLean, please unmute yourself.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for all of this wonderful information about all of the properties that you're looking to include in the upzoning. I am here on behalf of Mike Rovner, and we have been trying to work with the city to provide much needed step down senior housing opportunities for our residents. No one has really talked about the seniors tonight, but in the previous meetings, there was a lot of people mentioning the opportunities for seniors. And it's really important that we're able to provide housing for seniors to downsize and free up their homes to the inventory for other families who'd like to move into the city. So we are hoping to continue to participate in this process and appreciate everybody's time and efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Debbie Brown, please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm assuming you can hear me.
We can hear you
Moving
fine,
on to my first, I really have a question to start off with. I don't know how appropriate that is. And I'm going to discuss and target the Henneman property. I believe that is agenda item number 11B. The development of that particular property, I was very interested in hearing the idea of what and where different types of housing could be developed. And yes, it does have a lot of hillside, and so maybe that would prevent a large or increase in density. I'm hoping that that is the case. But my question is this: since we already have a developer that has come forward with interest in developing that property, has the commission looked at that and reviewed what that developer is asking for? If he's asking for increased density so that he can develop a multi amount of homes up there, whether duplexes or single family. On behalf of our neighborhood, Simi South Hills, we actually, a lot of us live on Rudolph Drive, which is directly adjacent to the Henneman property. Encourage that you please consider the lower density property development so that it doesn't negatively impact the community that we have enjoyed and the reason that we moved and purchased our homes here in the first place. Because by developing and increasing the intensity, the negative part for us will be definite increase in traffic. We have Crestview Elementary School that's a block away. So we already have quite a bit of traffic that goes through our neighborhood. So I please request, many of us have written in. We talked about this in 2012 when a developer came forward and wanted to beef up the intensity so that he could put a lot of homes in there. I please ask that you look at our community that we have here in Simi South Hills and recognize the value that it is to us and the purpose why we moved to this location in the first place. Thank you so much.
Thank you. By the way, perfect timing, right at 3 minutes. I congratulate you. Next caller.
Apologies, one moment. I
No
think
worries.
Max Guinness, one of our attendees, has an older version of Zoom and there's some technical difficulties. We'll go to Dane Chadwick. Dane, please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Good evening, Mr. Chadwick. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Dane Chadwick, and I'm speaking in favor of the property located at 1761 Oak Road in the consideration of your housing element update. I believe it's a great property for this purpose. In one, as Stratus mentioned, it is perfect for an infield as opposed to a sprawl to the outer spaces and a depletion of our open space. I do believe it helps in the city's obligation in regards to meeting the housing element update. I also think that it would be perfect without too much hindrance, being for an upzoning, because it is sandwiched between right now high density and to the east and high density to the west, bordering both sides of the property. And so along also with Anastasia Preej with City Ventures, I do believe that a higher density would give a developer a better chance to pencil out a project with a greater upside and a higher percentage to bring the project to fruition. So, and I also noticed that I'm just a little bit outside of the circle for the MetroLink. But I think with some creative works with city planning, I noticed that the bike trail ends right at Yosemite, and somehow we can pick up that Oak project to be able to get over that through maybe the waterworks. That would be fantastic. So thank you. I appreciate your consideration, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Next.
Chairman, we have a attendee who did not sign up or at all. May they be allowed to speak or?
Yes, by all means.
Roop Mann, please unmute yourself.
Hi guys, so sorry I didn't sign up. I actually just got back from driving someone at LAX, so I'm going to keep this short and simple. But I just wanted to say that I am in support of upzoning on everything that was listed, from the Los Angeles Avenue corridor to the Oak Road properties, with an emphasis on affordable housing. I've spoken before. I was born and raised here, and I would really like to see some more affordable housing so that I could move out of my parents' house. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're listening, but I don't want to live here forever with them, but I would like to stay in Simi Valley. But that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for letting me speak.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Do we have any more?
Max Guinness, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, commissioners. My name is Max Guinness. I actually live in Oxnard, but I wanted to call because this is really a regional issue. Oxnard, where I live, we have the highest poverty rate almost in the state, about 25%. And it's due to housing costs. And a lot of the people who live here, they work in LA. And if it were more affordable to live sort of anywhere in Ventura County, or of course in LA County as well, I think they wouldn't have to cram into places that are overcrowded in multi-generational housing. It's really had a human cost, as people have had to crowd, and that's exacerbated their infection risk for COVID this whole time. And it's just a bad experience, especially for kids who are really trying to have an online learning experience at home. And this kind of situation, I hope this specific problem is in the past once we get everyone vaccinated and go back to normal lives. But you never know what the next thing is going to be, and people deserve a comfortable home. So I want to echo some of the just general support for upzoning that's been mentioned in the past. I think places like Simi Valley and elsewhere in the county have had plenty of single family home development. And right now what we need is density. We need mixed use development. We need infill development. And I think that's really the way to build inclusive communities that are more affordable, whether it's market rate housing or subsidized, and also walkable. People deserve to have living situations that don't require them to get in a vehicle every time they have to go anywhere. It's the kind of place I would want to live, and many people in my generation would want to live in. So, and the last thing I'd mention is RHNA is a floor. It's a legal floor, but lots of people, I think, would love to live in Simi Valley. It's a wonderful city, and it's on a ceiling. So I hope you'll consider the challenges that have been faced in the past to meet RHNA goals, and that, is there a reason, for example, not to just legalize triplexes citywide or duplexes citywide? It'll probably happen in state legislation anyway, and Simi Valley could get ahead of the curve and also upzone these sort of more tight-knit residential areas as well, and mixed use and all that. So thank you very much for your time, and appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. Any other callers?
No more, oh, apologies, no more callers on this issue.
Okay. Do we have any questions of any commissioners? Any further comments from staff?
Thank you, Chairman Mann. I did want to answer a couple of the questions that were raised. One was from Wahid Akberzi, and he was referring to the 1741 Oak Road site. And I did believe, and I forgot to mention, there was a letter of correspondence received from the Pinecrest Schools, I believe, just to the north, that I think they want to be included. So Mr. Akberzi was just, I think, notifying us that that property might be up for sale, and maybe if we bundle all those lots together, maybe get something even better than just the one lot.
Is he saying 1741 or 1761, the one that Dane Chadwick spoke
Oh,
about?
that's the same property, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that was the one question. I just wanted to acknowledge his comment there about the school site could potentially be included for some sort of rezoning or some sort of housing potential. The other one was from Mrs. Debbie Brown. She mentioned the Heineman property, and I just wanted to let her know that she asked if the commission has heard from a developer on that site. We do not have any pending application on that property. The property owner has been in contact with staff, and right now the property is designated as open space, so really just one house per 40 acres is allowed on there. And that's a good kind of just holding zoning, but as far as allowing any new development, they either have to go through this housing element process or go through a rezone on their own. So just want to let her know that we do not have a pending development, but if we were to rezone it, we are trying to do something similar to her property on Rudolph or on Covington, where it's either attached or detached single family, something at the lower density. So I just wanted to assure we're on the same page on that one.
Okay.
And that's, I think that's all I have. Oh, and then I think the last speaker, Max Guinness, was mentioning about doing duplexes and triplexes by right. That's actually one of the holes in our development code. We really don't have we allow ADUs, we allow JEDUs on every single family zone property, but really don't have a good way of allowing duplexes. And I think it's a gap in our code. So yeah, we probably will have to address it at some point, whether it's part of our development code update or through state law, but I do think it's something that for certain areas of the city, like that Old Town area we're looking at, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. So if we have no other questions and no other comments, the way I look at it, we can either receive step 3 presentation in preparation for the future adoption of the strategies to meet the city's housing needs for the housing element update, or provide further direction to staff. I see no reason other than to receive step 3 presentation, unless somebody else has any thoughts or comments about additional information or questions of staff. Commissioner Hodge, are you talking?
Yeah, I was trying to.
We see your lips moving, but nothing coming out.
Your favorite environment.
Go ahead. What do you got, Mr.
Actually,
Hodge?
I'd like staff to probably now is a good time because of the people who might be listening, to answer this question as it relates to the next agenda item, and that's are we doing anything to calculate the opportunities for SROs if it turns out that the city amends the text language so that we are credited for single room occupancy units to meet RHNA numbers because they have a kitchen, et cetera. Are we calculating that or considering that, or what would we do to consider that when submitting the finalized document to the state?
Stratus, do you want me to start from that first? If you are able to amend your code in a way that get SROs to be more like a housing unit, then it's no different than your multifamily housing. For example, like an apartment, it's just smaller units than compared to an apartment. So we don't necessarily get to, for example, unless you have a specific density that you are allowing for SRO units, and then you have a more of a trend of developing it. It's not really that different than a multifamily housing project in that sense. So we would not be necessarily like calculating it separately or differently than we would normally calculate on capacity in a multifamily land.
And Commissioner Hodge, I would add that the direction from the City Council when we started this ordinance update with the SRO was to make sure that if we were to facilitate the development of SROs, that would help our RHNA numbers. And so one of the changes or code amendments you'll see is to ensure that kitchens and bathrooms are included in each unit. And that will ensure that the SROs do count towards RHNA. The SROs have been on the books or been allowed since 2014. We've had one application take advantage of it, but no project's ever been built. So we do hope that the ordinance update will facilitate the development of these types of housing types.
Okay.
Okay, and I appreciate all of that, and I'm sure that we'll address that, coming up right now. What I was hoping to find out is, this is a little different because the SROs go into commercial space. They don't go into residential space, and so it's very difficult to, I think, foresee the future and say, oh, okay, we've got this much commercial space, and imagine, that somebody might come forward with a SRO project to move into a commercial space where we know that in residential space, you can calculate the number that is the maximum that could be built, and you could calculate, the opportunity for people to build units in those areas consistent with, the very project that was just, or rather presentation that was just provided. But to me, it's sort of a big conundrum or a big question to me is, if there's any way or calculation as the state identified any method of calculating if you have an SRO project, or rather ordinance that provides for the kinds of development that would otherwise suffice for RHNA, is there some way to include that within your availability for housing consistent with what we're looking at?
Yeah, I think
that was the idea. I think the answer is no, but
yeah, I think the properties we identified tonight and all those slides were all intended for residential zoning.
Mr. Peros, we're going to go ahead and table or put off most of his questions and your answers
for the next item.
To the next item, just so we don't create any problems, because we're kind of getting off of 11B into 11A.
I'll provide the rest of the answer when it comes back.
So let's go ahead. Yeah, let's wait till we close off 11B, then we'll go to 11A for more specifics on that. Okay, with that said, do we have anything else? Then by consensus, do we receive the step 3 presentation in preparation for future adoption of strategies to meet the city housing needs for for the Housing Element Update Program and move on to the next one. Okay, hearing none by consensus, that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to take about a 5-minute break before we go on to the next item. So it is 8:05, 5-minute break, 8:10, we'll be back. Got it? Okay. Let's call back to order the meeting, Planning Commission meeting of April 21st, 2021. And we are now moving on to item 11A1. This is a time and place set for a public hearing on the consideration of ZS 750 to amend portions of Title IX of the Simi Valley Municipal Code to establish single-room occupancy, SRO, housing unit standards, and the determination that the amendment is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. Are there any ex parte communications to report? Hearing none, may we have an oral report on this matter by staff?
Good evening, Chairman Mann, members of the Planning Commission. As alluded to in the prior item tonight, the single-room occupancy, or SRO component of our development code kind of came about with adoption of our 2014 housing element back in 2014. And the SRO project is a text amendment to create SRO standards or development standards for new SRO projects. If you recall, back in 2019, the Planning Commission reviewed our first SRO project, and that was forwarded to the City Council in early 2020. At that point, the City Council approved it. During that same process, though, however, the City Council directed staff to create special SRO standards, as the prior project was not developed with specific standards. So our proposal tonight is to present to you code amendments to include specific development standards for SRO projects. With that, our staff, Principal Planner Claudia Pedroso and Senior Planner Jennifer Santos, are here tonight, as well as our city consultant from Rincon Consultants, Jerry Hittleman, who has prepared the proposed standards tonight. And I'll toss it over to Ms. Santos to begin the presentation.
Thank
Jennifer?
you, Mr. Gibson. Mr. Hillman, are you there? Can you hear me? Mr. Hiddleman, if you'd like to go ahead and start the presentation.
I long for the day where we're actually all in the same place.
So just little technical difficulties. We'll see if he's on the, is he on the screen there?
Yes. Jerry, can you hear us?
I think we can hear Mr. Hittleman. I would say move on to the next caller, but that's not going to work this time, so. Give him a nudge, send him a text.
Is Jerry on the screen there? Jerry, if you hear us, can you turn your camera on? Can you? Are we on mute? Is the Zoom on mute?
Okay, Mr. Hillman, you're with us?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good job, Mr. Gibson. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, Chair and Planning Commission members. I'd like to start with some background information on the next slide, please. Okay, on January 13th, 2014, the City Council adopted the SRO ordinance to allow them in the CPD and mixed-use overlay zone districts with a conditional use permit. On October 28th, 2019, the City Council requested that the staff review current and potential new development standards. And then on January 13th of 2020, City Council officially initiated the SRO code amendment and provided staff direction to consider adding specific SRO development standards and requirements that are not currently in the code. These are to include SR unit maximum and minimum square footages, parking requirement options, requiring a private kitchen and bathroom, private and community open space requirements, and also on-site management options. Next slide, please. And then the proposed amended single room occupancy definition is a small residential unit with a private bathroom and kitchen facility. This would be between 250 to 450 square feet, consisting of one habitable room and a structure with other similar units. So basically, single room occupancy residential units provide a diverse form of housing for additional housing opportunities and a choice for individuals that are just starting out or need a more affordable living arrangement. They are considered critical in helping the city meet the state's required regional housing needs assessment numbers as discussed previously. Next slide, please. This slide shows the floor plans of typical SRO housing units of both 250 on the left and 350 square feet on the right. Each unit has a private bathroom and kitchen with space for a small living and sleeping area in these examples. These units are similar to an extended stay hotel room. Next slide. SRO units are intended to be more of a micro apartment or studio living situation. These types of units could provide affordable living opportunities for CME residents. Next. These pictures show some examples of common recreation areas, which can include a combination of indoor and outdoor areas, such as small workout areas, a business center, or rooftop garden or lounge area. This general plan map shows two of several areas in the city that are zoned either commercial plan district in red or have the mixed use MU overlay zone in brown, where we anticipate SRO projects would be developed. As shown, the red CPD zoned areas are located throughout the city with a good portion consisting of shopping centers. The brown color coded mixed use areas are located mainly near First Street and Los Angeles Avenue, also Tapo Street, and as well as along the Los Angeles Avenue corridor. Now this next slide shows, this slide shows a project that was recently approved on Tapo Street and Eileen Street and was approved by the City Council in March of 2020. It consists of 2- and 3-story buildings for the construction of 60 small residential SRO units at about a density of 80 units per acre. Units were approximately 400 square feet with private kitchens and bathrooms, common areas, and a rooftop deck. Next slide, please. Staff researched several jurisdictions in California. This slide shows just a few of the cities. Due to space limitations here, there are more on your staff report, and found that most jurisdictions had specific requirements pertaining to the unit size, occupancy, private kitchen and bathroom requirements, parking, private and common open space requirements, and other requirements such as providing a management plan. The information was analyzed and ultimately used to develop standards that best fit Simi Valley. Next slide. In October of 2020, staff presented the draft SRO text amendment to all 4 neighborhood councils, and comments are summarized on these slides, next 2 slides. The neighborhood council's recommendation was that occupancy limits for SROs should be included, and there should be a 2-person per unit occupancy limit. However, staff's recommendation is not to limit occupancy. Reason is there is a potential conflict with current housing laws, such as the Federal Fair Housing Act. It's also inconsistent with other Simi Valley residential zoning standards that do not restrict occupancy. Neighborhood councils also recommended that there be a provision of at least 1 parking space per unit. Staff's recommendation includes a combination of parking spaces required depending on the project site and shared parking arrangements. We'll go into more detail on that later. The neighborhood councils also recommended a minimum stay should be greater than 30 days. Staff concurs with this minimum 30-day stay recommendation. They also recommended that they provide housing options with more affordable rates. Staff concurs with this recommendation as well. Now, moving to the current zoning requirements, as mentioned previously, SRO housing projects are allowed in the CPD and MU overlay districts with a conditional use permit, which requires a planning commission hearing. There are no changes anticipated with the first 2 bullet points. The development code currently also requires SRO projects to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis under the commercial development standards that apply to projects in the CPD and MU overlay zoning districts. It was envisioned that staff would have the ability to impose reasonable conditions on projects through the CUP development process that would ensure compliance with the city's general plan and development code. However, staff is recommending that development standards specific to SRO housing projects be added to the development code, as will be described in the next few slides. So the proposed development standards for SRO housing projects include parking requirements first. For SRO projects within an existing retail office complex, 1 parking space per 3 units plus 1 guest space for every 5 units plus 1 parking space for an on-site manager with the shared parking analysis would be required. Now, for standalone SRO projects, 1 parking space per unit plus 1 parking space for an on-site manager would be required unless a shared parking arrangement is also proposed. Now, support for shared parking arrangements with properties adjacent to and across the street would be allowed with a proper parking analysis. Now, the site requirements are that there be 1 covered and secured bike parking space for every 3 units. There be an 11-foot by 27-foot loading zone required for each project. Common open space requirements of 300 square feet per project plus 15 square feet per unit. And the SR unit requirements are that the unit size range between 250 square feet and 450 square feet. That there be private kitchens and bathrooms required within the units for them to count towards, again, the city's RHNA numbers. Each unit would also have to be provided with a 24 cubic foot or cubic square foot storage closet within the unit or in a common storage area within the building. Now we'll move on to operational requirements. The rental duration, again, would be a minimum of 30 days. There would have to be a preliminary security plan provided, and the proposed ordinance requires submittal of a preliminary security plan with on-site 24-hour management and emergency procedures. The alternatives to this requirement could include the option to require a security plan for projects with 10 units or more and exempt projects with 10 units or less. And some jurisdictions have done this. Another option to not require a security plan, since such is not required of other multifamily projects. So simply don't require it. So with that, the proposed changes will establish SRO housing unit standards and requirements in the commercial plan district and mixed-use overlay districts. It is recommended that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the approval of ZS 750 SRO housing unit regulations. Thank you, and we're available for questions.
Just to clarify, that'll be a recommendation to the city council.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any planning commissioners have any questions of staff? Microphone. And you didn't hit the, oh, you
There we
did hit
go.
the little thing.
I
Says
turned it
NQ.
off instead, so.
Good job.
I do have a question of Mr. Hiddleman, if possible. Mr. Hiddleman, we used Camarillo as an example. Do we know how many SROs Camarillo has?
Currently, we are not aware of any in Camarillo, just in Ventura so far, within Ventura County, the city of Ventura.
How many does the city of Ventura have?
I believe they
Approximately.
have one project. I'm not sure how many units. Do you know that, Jennifer?
I believe it was, off the top of my head, no, I don't recall. I think it was about 40 units, and then there's another one that's in the pipeline. I think that one is for 65 units. They're both in the downtown area, one off of Palm and one off of California Street.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I've got a question. If you could go back to, there was, and I'm sorry, I missed it. It was at the very bottom of one of the previous slides that, I think it was the one before that. Okay, so that's it. Each unit is to be provided with a 24-foot storage closet within the unit. Okay. Or common storage area. Okay, that's what I couldn't read. It went really fast. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got a question about the Ventura SRO project. Do they have a security plan or security on that property? Do we know?
I don't think we know, but let me see if we have the City of Ventura regulations anywhere. No, I don't believe we do have. And actually, I do recall looking at their ordinance, and I believe it's more like what's currently allowed in Simi Valley, where you do a conditional use permit and then they add conditions to the project as needed. They didn't appear to have any strict standards at this point.
Thank you.
Got, Mr. Hiddleman, I'm sorry to jump in again. Do we have any idea of the size of the units in that particular project in Ventura, or those projects in Ventura?
I don't know. Do you know, Jennifer?
Unfortunately, I don't know, but they would, my guess is that they average around the same size as the other jurisdictions, or smaller, between 250 to
Well, I'm just asking because there's, the 250 to 450, and it looks like other cities have kind of different sizes, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, they do range up to 450 square feet, and lowest one I've seen is about 150 square feet.
I'm sorry, I have another question. I don't know, it's been a while since I've lived in an apartment, and my issue, I guess, my question, does Simi Valley, do we have any requirements for any sort of outdoor storage? A lot of apartments, you're in a, like a open parking structures, but a lot of them, when you pull into your assigned parking spot, there was outdoor storage for, things that you could not have put into a smaller, I mean, I've lived in a studio apartment, which I absolutely loved, and it was fantastic, but I still needed some storage outdoor that had like larger items. If you've got picnic baskets or chairs and umbrellas that you would go to the beach with, that type of thing. Does CME have any requirements for apartments having any sort of an outdoor storage in addition to what the inside is?
It is one of our optional standards for multifamily projects. However, the size of it is not mentioned in the code.
Yes, it's a required standard, but the size is not mentioned.
So outdoor storage is a requirement for apartments, and this would also be included for the SROs.
Well, for the multifamily projects, it could be a separate detached building. It could be attached to the carport. It could be on a balcony or patio of a multifamily unit, or it could be inside a garage. For the
Okay, thank you.
And
Ms. Santos could refer to the SRO standard proposed.
And as part of this, it would be required to have either inside a storage closet or within a common storage area. And that would just be based on a case-by-case basis when it comes in.
Okay, so there would not be anything, if you've got parking per unit, that you don't, again, this would only be either an indoor storage closet within the unit itself or in a common storage area. So it could, is this in addition to an indoor closet, or is this separate from? Is that what you're talking about, that last item there? That would be in addition to any indoor closets?
It could be, it's either or. So it could be either a closet or within a common storage area.
I think the intent is to be in addition to.
I guess that's my question, is that you need indoor closets for living space indoors, your normal closet, but I'm asking, is there requirement for an additional, whether it's a indoor storage unit or common area like we're talking about? I'm asking, is it in addition to indoor storage that would be for living space?
So this is Claudia Pedroso. That's an excellent question. The requirement is a minimum of 24 cubic feet. If they want to provide an additional closet to that, that's fine. Otherwise, the minimum is that requirement, because you got to consider that these units are 250 to 450 square feet. They're not that large. And, we also require them to have a full bathroom and kitchen within the unit. So that's why we're giving the flexibility of at least requiring a minimum size. Whatever else they can provide beyond that is okay. If they want to provide a closet inside the unit and provide additional storage area in a common area, that will be an additional feature.
Thank you.
Okay, go back, if you can, go back to the picture of the sample units. Okay, so we're going to look at living a 250 square foot unit. Does that closet in the bottom right of the 250 square foot unit count as that 24 square foot of storage space?
Yes.
Okay, so so either one of those two closets would be accountable for the 24 square foot of storage space.
You met that requirement. Anything
Okay.
beyond that is better.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Other questions?
I have a couple questions, if everybody else has already gone.
By all means, believe me, somebody else will come in, but go ahead, and Commissioner Hodge.
By the way, 24 cubic feet rather, is an exceedingly small space. I mean, that's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. I mean, that's right there. That's 27 square feet. 24 square feet is a very small area. I would think that would be easily provided. All right, so I have a couple quick questions with respect to the community open space, we're talking about 300 feet plus 15 additional feet, square feet per unit. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now I can see for larger projects that being, quite appropriate. My question is, I can't assume, and I don't know if staff is assuming that there might be some smaller projects. I mean, that you could have, maybe somebody would want to build 10 units or maybe 8 units, especially if you go to 450 square feet. You could have a pretty small project, and we're going to, mandate this 300 square foot plus 15 feet a common area. And I think it's nice and everything like that, but I'm looking at the cost of imposing that. Was there any discussion by staff when considering that number about limiting it to projects that are, include a certain number of units?
So the 300 square feet minimum plus the 15 square feet per unit, it can be combined in different ways. Many of these type of projects not only have a rooftop terrace, but they also can have like a little business center. They can have a small gym. They can even have a little community room. And considering the fact that these units will not have balconies or any private open space, we felt that was a reasonable number. If you have only 8 units, then you're only providing 15 square feet of extra for the 8 units. So that's kind of how we control how much common area is provided.
Okay, my understanding is that it was a minimum of 300 square feet plus 15 additional feet for every unit. Did I misunderstand that?
No, you got it right. So if you only have 8 units, then you only provide 8 times 15 plus the 300.
Okay, so if you only have 8 units, as I think was what you just said, you're looking at an additional 8 times 15, an additional 120. So you're looking at 420 square feet of community space, which is larger than, one of the units. I'm just bringing this up because my thinking was that there should be a minimum number of units before we start making that kind of requirement. I think it's a quality of life issue. I understand that, but there's also the cost issues involved. So that's something I'd like the commission to consider. I also wanted to talk about management and managers. So there was a slide in there talking about an obligation to provide a 24-hour manager or security person. I think it really gets down to management. Is that right? 24-hour management for every project?
That is what we have right now in the proposed ordinance. However, like we showed on the slide, we are open to look at different options. Some of the other cities have a requirement depending on the amount of units, whether they have it or not.
I think it's California Code of Regulation 25 subsection 42 or something like that talks about manager requirements at apartments. And it's, you've got less than 4 units, you don't have to do anything between 4 units and 16 units or 15 units, really. You have to leave information available for anyone on the property to see how to contact the owner. And anybody, any unit or project with 16 or more units is required to have an on-site manager. And then if it's a hotel, which, these are sort of the size of hotels, but if it's a hotel, it's 12 units or larger. So I would like us to, to talk about that as well, because included within that code section is an obligation to pay the managers. And if we're not requiring apartment buildings in Simi Valley that have less than 16 units to have on-site managers and incur that cost, I'm wondering about doing the same thing for an SRO project where we're trying to minimize costs so that they could minimize the cost of the people who would be tenants there. It seems that might be something we want to talk about. I also wanted to talk about this mutual parking agreement concept. Do we have any of those in town now?
Well, for Mr. Hodge, we have some shared parking agreements between commercial properties. I'm not familiar with the residential commercial relationship other than the one we just approved for the Tapo Alamo project. So this concept is available currently in our code. So this
well, that's good, because then we have some experience with it, and I'm not trying to pin anybody's ears back at this point. I'm just trying to sort of see what that might look like, because it seems to me, you know, if you're going to have a project and you're going to have this agreement, this, you know, mutual parking agreement or whatever it's called, it must be something that is an easement. It would have to run with the land, because you wouldn't want some new owner to come along and, you know, of the commercial property and say, hey, I don't want to have this any longer. And all of a sudden these people don't have a place to park, or the people who live at the residential side of the mutual agreement to park. And then it also, it would seem like it would limit the opportunity for the commercial space to renovate or change use, say from something which, you know, maybe the businesses are more, it's a commercial zone, and all of a sudden, and it's a retail and it's closed at night. And then somebody comes along and wants to put a restaurant in there, redevelop it for a different use that actually has competing parking. And so I was curious to know, maybe we can talk a little bit later, I'm hopeful, about how that would actually works, because it seems to me that that there are some unintended consequences that may affect how we want to address that. And then the last question I wanted to ask staff before you know, we go forward again is the design of the text rather, with respect to and perhaps I don't understand this, but it's one unit. If you have your own parking on the property or the parcel where the project is built, it's one parking space for one unit. But if you're including or receiving all of your parking from a shared agreement, it's one parking space for 3 units. And I was quizzed by that, why you need less parking if the parking is done at an offsite parking space versus an on-site parking space, because it doesn't seem to really change the demand any for utility. And I was curious why, if you know, have this mutual agreement with an adjacent parcel, you only need to have one parking space per 3 units, but if it's on your own parcel, then it's 1 for 1. And somebody could speak to that.
Yes, so when the reason behind the one parking space per unit on a standalone project is that it has to be self-sufficient. So that's why you have to provide at least the one parking space for the unit. However, if they end up having a shared parking analysis where sorry, not shared parking analysis, a reciprocal parking agreement, which will be supported by a parking analysis, then you have the flexibility of requiring less on-site parking spaces, because you're going to count on the shared parking that you can have on the adjacent or properties across the way. So, but when you have a freestanding building and there's no other way that you can get additional parking, that's why that one has to be self-parked. And then your
I
question
understand that,
regarding
but my question's different. I apologize, but my question's different. My question is why is the standard 1 for 1 on your own parcel, but if 100% of your parking is coming from the adjacent property next to you, it's 1 parking space per 3 units? Or did I misunderstand that?
when you have an agreement for reciprocal parking with a property next to you, you have more availability of parking. So the requirement is less because you have the possibility of finding additional parking in the other area that you're sharing with. And when you have a project that you don't have the option to park somewhere else, it has to be self-sufficient.
Can we go to that slide, please?
Thank you. That's what I was going to ask you, Commissioner Hodge, if you wouldn't mind if I asked that question. Thank you.
All right, so it's right there. So, and I realize that there's a CUP and I realize that there's a parking analysis that has to be done, and we'd have an opportunity to look at this. But if we're telling people this is the standard that we're imposing, and they meet it and they come along and we say, well, gee, that really doesn't work for us, I think that's a problem. So it says for SRO projects with an existing retail office complex nearby, 1 parking space per 3 units. So if you've got 30 units, you need 10 parking spaces plus 1 guest space for every 5 units, correct?
Yes, so then you'll need 16 units.
But,
I mean, 16
right,
parking spaces.
you need 15 parking spaces plus 1 for the on-site manager, that's 16. But if it's a standalone project, you need 1 for 1 plus the on-site manager. So you need 31. Why would the same place, the same, be adequately served, the same project be adequately served by 31 units, 31 parking spaces if it's on your project, but only by 16 units, or actually it's one space for every 5 units, 21 parking spaces if people are parking at the Ralph's next door?
Well, again, like I mentioned before, is because when you're sharing parking with another property, there's going to be an ability to be able to park additional cars if you need to. Also, these units, the SRO units are also anticipated that potentially a lot of the, many, not a lot of them, but many of the residents would probably not have a car. However, again, when you have, one of the concerns from the neighborhood council was that, it was going to be an overflow of parking. So when you have a standalone project, that's why, in our opinion, it was best to be self-sufficient because you don't have anywhere else to park.
And
I
add
get
that-
it. I'm just quizzed as to how we just, the location where you park doesn't seem to have any impact on what your utility needs are, your demand. And to see 2 different paragraphs written that are fundamentally different, with one is 1 parking space per 3 units plus a parking space for every 5 units for a guest. The other one has no guest parking.
Correct. The reason why you don't have guest parking is because you're only providing per unit. That's the difference between the two. And both actually relate very closely to the requirements for when you deal with a density bonus law, where you have the parking requirements that are reduced. They're very equal to that.
And so another way to put that is in the first paragraph, the first option, think of a large shopping center where they want to convert part of the center into an SRO project. That 1 per 3 is under the assumption that the stores will be closed in the evening. That's when the workers from the SRO will come home. Thereby, less overall parking would be needed for the combined use. For the second option, when it's a standalone project, that owner only owns the SRO property. There's no shopping center next to it to share parking with, and there's nowhere else to get parking. So that's 1 space per unit plus the manager.
I guess I'm not understanding, Mr. Gibson, what 1 parking space per 3 units means. I mean, obviously you guys have this figured out, but I'm having a real difficult time understanding why you only need 1 parking space for every 3 units, and how that works. So, maybe we can, go on from here and it will hit me, but I'm very perplexed as to how you have 2 fundamentally different descriptions of how many parking spaces you need when it's the same project.
So, yeah, you still need perhaps 1 space per unit, but those units are picked up by the 75 other commercial parking spaces in the shopping center that are used by shoppers in the daytime, but they would also be used by the tenants in the evening when the shoppers go away. Because we don't want to create extra unused parking spaces for our overparked shopping centers. So we are sharing the parking between the SRO project and the shopping center so we don't fill the
Streets.
community with excess parking.
I think I understand what you're trying to say. What I think the real disconnect here between the 2 of us is that when I look at parking spaces, I'm assuming what you're talking about, that the need for spaces for parking at the commercial property at night is different. And I'm looking at that going, okay, fine, everybody's gone home. You got 75 parking spaces. You could have 75, 1 for 1, you could have 75 units. and are, I mean, that's an extreme example, of course, but then it would meet. You've got 75 parking spaces and 75 units, 75 spaces required. Because I have to assume that when these parking spaces were built for the retail that went in, they built as many as were required by the city. There's a language problem here. I think conceptually I understand what you're talking about, but I do think that there's a big time language gap here that we need to work on so that we don't have some confusion in the future. And I'll leave it there for now.
I'd actually like to add some to that though, because I think when you're talking about a retail / office complex, we're not talking about a minimum space. But we're assuming that you're talking about a complex that maybe has, like you were saying, during the day, you'd have people parking there for the office, but then at night they all go home. But again, the scenario where you've got 30 units plus one manager, that would be 31 parking spots if everybody had a car. And if you did the scenario of 1 per 3 plus 1 for every 5 units, that would mean 17 units. So you have a 14 unit shortage. But what if the complex is sitting next to a smaller retail space that's like a convenience store that doesn't have an additional 14 spaces, and that business is open all night and all day? I guess it seems that the equation is a little too simplified, that maybe we should be, and the city engineers can be looking at the amount of parking spaces that aren't adjacent spots, so that it's not an even this scenario if you've got space next door, because it seems as though you could easily still not have enough parking spots. Or also, many people possibly living in an SRO might have nighttime jobs, which means they're going to need that parking spot during the day. There isn't no correlation to when they are needing their parking spots, either side, meaning either the business or the units themselves.
So
that I just think it's as simple as, but maybe if you guys can explain that would, but I have to agree with Commissioner Hodge that it seems like the equation doesn't quite work out. And I know that, actually, I'll leave it at that.
So just wanted to mention that they will need to provide a shared parking analysis, which is usually prepared by an engineering firm, traffic engineering firm, that they figure that out. There's some standards that are used and everything. Plus, you count the actual parking that is available. Technically, what I'm understanding both of you commissioners are telling us is that you want to see both have one parking space required per unit, period. And if you have a shared parking arrangement, then you can go into something lesser. That's what I'm understanding that you're trying to say. And but what we're trying to portray was that we didn't want to tax a project that could share parking with the adjacent property or within the property with additional parking spaces, that also they're required to provide 40 more spaces, because that's what the SRO is going to require, where there's actually parking that they could use. And the shared parking analysis is going to show whether that demand could be met or not.
Well, here's if I could explain myself as succinctly as possible. If we look at the project and we say this project needs 31 spaces, then there should be 31 spaces on the standalone project. If it's some combination of standalone project and shared parking agreement, or 100% shared parking agreement, there should be 31 spaces subject to that agreement. And I mean, and saying 1 space per 3 units and adding this other requirement for guest spaces, I mean, it's the driver should be the demand for utility. The provision of parking spaces should be consistent with that. And if there's the project next door is provides for those number of units of those number of spaces because of the nature of the activity next door, great. But the driver should be what the utility demand is, not it's a different kind of space. So we're changing the number of spaces per units required. It's to me, it just doesn't make any sense to look at it that way. This is sort of, to me, this is sort of a backward reasoning, as opposed to just sitting back and saying, look, this project needs 31 spaces. Is there 31 spaces in a shared parking agreement that can be utilized, by the neighboring parcel? If there is, great, then we have what we need. But it should, the number of the demand should be based upon the demand, not by, where you're parking.
Right, and one solution to that is to, for paragraph 2, we could just take that down to 1 space for 3 units to match the first paragraph. That would achieve our reduced parking, our encouragement for reduced parking to minimize the expense of putting in parking and to help achieve SRO projects. So you could go.
Mr. Gibson, let me ask you a question about that. Why would we have a requirement for 1 parking space per 1 unit? And then by saying, well, now we're suddenly willing to say 1 parking space for 3 units, including if it was on site. I mean, what was the driver of that change? I don't see it. So
yeah,
I mean, I really don't. And maybe we should move on and hear comments from the public and et cetera, and address this again. But I mean, the issue is, to me, what's the demand? What do we need to provide? This is a quality of life issue. And you make these places a good place to live, as well as an inexpensive place to live, or more affordable place to live is the better way to put it. But I don't understand how we have different requirements based upon where somebody parks. It just, either it's 1 parking space per unit plus 1 parking space for an on-site manager in both locations, or it's a different number if we feel like it should be a different number for both locations. Either way, it should be the same.
Yeah, that is a possibility. I agree with that. It can be a consistent provision. I kind of get what you're saying from that component. The first option, if it's part of a larger shopping center, you're gaining from the use of the unused parking spaces for the commercial component during non-business hours. So the overall demand for extra parking spaces is less. But you're right. The provision can be more direct, so that the standards match. The shared parking agreement is also an option, and you did mention earlier that how those work. It is a reciprocal parking agreement. It's a recorded document, so we're dealing with parties that agree to the parking. We're not taking away someone else's parking by the city. This is an agreement in place between the shopping centers and SRO projects. So we're not taking parking away from other non-willing participants.
Got it.
So,
and then it would run with the land. So when
it would run with the land. So that's
owner A sells it to owner B. Owner B buys it with that knowledge.
So that does answer your other question.
Yeah.
And another thing also because I know it's just maybe trying to explain a little bit more, but in my experience, when you're dealing with shared parking analysis, you always end up with about a 30% parking available that you can share, and that's where the 1 per 3 units came about, because that's usually what technically it comes out. It's usually about a 20 to 30% surplus parking available when you do a shared parking analysis in any shopping center. That's including office uses, and you have restaurants, and you have retail shops. So that's kind of where that number came from.
And that makes sense, but I think that it needs to be explained like that, or just because you're going to you're going to have this parking analysis, and the parking analysis will say something to the effect of, we're 30% overparked. We're okay with having this. We've got 100 units. We've got 100 parking spaces, and this provides for 31 units or 30 units parking spaces for the project next door. that just falls right into place. But I was looking at this and confused to it looking like we were saying that, no, we don't need to have the parking lot next door provide as many parking spaces to meet the need of the residential component, because when they park on our place, they need 3 times less parking. So I get it. I understand the position now. I just think it needs to be better worded.
Okay, moving on. Other questions? Okay, I'll ask one. Does the state model have any parking requirements for SROs?
When you're dealing with density bonus type of projects, yeah, you actually have 1 parking space per unit.
Okay.
And if you are within half a mile of a bus stop, you can actually go to half.
Okay.
And if you have like 100% affordable, the director has the ability to require no parking at all for the project.
Okay, the project that got approved last year on Tapo, what were the parking requirements for that project?
I will let Mr. Gibson answer that one.
There were no parking requirements stated in the code. It's subject to the planning commission action that night. So there were no standards in our code for parking.
Do you remember what we approved that night for parking?
I believe it was around 35. The city council added another 10 or 15 spaces.
And how many units total in the project?
60 units, so I think.
So roughly half.
I think they ended up with around 40 or so spaces. I wouldn't quote me on that.
Did it also mandate a shared parking agreement as well, or just the 40 and they were done?
A shared parking agreement wasn't needed because the HOA had the provisions for parking already.
Okay.
In the complex.
Okay.
Chairman Mann, were you talking about the Tapestry project?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a little, I'll add this into it because we were all there, or most of us were there. You remember that the code at the time didn't have a description for how many parkings they require, what Mr. Gibson was just talking about. And it was considered at that time, and I think that the idea has been changed, that they could apply the commercial square footage parking requirement to that residential component. And that's what was originally done. And then it also, because of requirements with the Housing Accountability Act, things weren't done within a certain number of time, and we waived certain things to even talk about. So that I wouldn't look at that project as indicative of what we want to include within here.
Okay.
There's a lot of baggage on that project.
Understood. Okay, my next question is, well, for lack of a better thing, Part 7, Item 5 on page 23. It's already been discussed about the operations management of security, submission of preliminary information describing who controls, dictates, or approves whether or not we're going to require, or is that what we're going to do tonight, description of general operations, 24-hour on-site, security plan, emergency procedures, SRO rental process. Is that left up to staff? Are we looking at mandating if they're over 16, which seems to be what the current state law is for other multifamilies, or is that just at staff's discretion?
The commissioner, the planning commission has the ability to modify this requirement. We just basically kind of took the information from the research that we had and put it there as a proposed amendment, code amendment, but the commissioners have you can suggest language.
Right now, as it's worded, it's up to the staff to make these, because you're asking us to approve these items, and I believe that we're approving, is it staff is going to do, or are we going to go through every one of these?
Well, in this
Or is there-
particular one,
Or this is a set of models that you want us to go with?
this particular one was one that we wanted to probably get more feedback or comments, only because of there was the other cities that we researched, they have different things going on. So this is probably a good one that we wanted to get some feedback. If there's any other items that you looked through when you went through the proposed code amendment that you wanted to bring up, we can discuss that as well.
Okay. And my other comment was one that we've already addressed is the common area. I mean, bottom line is, 300 square feet, a little bit smaller than a two-car garage to put into perspective. Probably up to a certain number of units, that would be sufficient, and then over that, rather than making the plus 15 starts at every unit. So under the current one, if they did 10 units, they would require 450 square feet of common areas. I know that some of the cities require some to be inside, some to be outside. There's nothing in ours as it stands other than the roughly, if we do again, 10 units, be 450 square feet. That may be a little bit excessive, but then again, it's just a little bit bigger than a two-car garage, so it's probably not too bad. But I think we could probably shorten that down a little bit more. That would just be one of my little comments offhand, but not so much a question. Okay, questions?
Yes, I have another question. Can the city explain how the bicycle parking on a regular unit would, I believe I read it was for the SROs, you guys want to reduce it down to 1 for every 3. And what type of parking for bicycles are we actually required to provide?
Parking for bicycles is 1 bicycle space per 3 units.
And what, for this is for the SROs, and what type of parking are we talking about?
Well,
The city's requirements.
it says covered.
This is covered and secured, so it could be many different ways. It could be inside a parking garage, it could be the storage bins, it could be many different ways. We're not dictating exactly how to do it, we're just asking them to have it covered and secured.
Would you define just a post with a bike lock as secured, or there has to be a locking separate compartment?
That could be secure as long as it's under roof, so it's covered.
Okay. Sorry,
I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
Gray, didn't mean to step on your toes there.
No, you're perfectly fine with that question. That does kind of help. Can you please, again, it just needs to be covered, or does it also need to have the ability for locking? That, I guess, I'm sorry. I was a cyclist, and when I had my studio apartment, I was riding 185 miles a week, and the parking was extremely important for me when I had my studio apartment. And then when I also had, when I was able to upgrade to a 1 or 2 bedroom. And if we are hopefully trying to encourage with transportation that, I'm just concerned about, we're limiting right now the SROs to 1 to 3, 1 space for every 3. But is there a requirement to ensure that these are locked? I understand that it does not need to be a complete closed-in unit that's locked, but what is the requirement for security on bicycles that the city has?
So we'll probably have whatever an application comes in, that will have a proposal. There's different ways that you can lock a unit. You could have the typical S-looking bike racks locking devices that you see in many places that you can bring your own lock and put it in there. I've also seen the basically enclosed kind of storage bins that you could potentially do that, but those ones take more space. So it's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis, as long as it's lockable and it's secured and it's under and it's covered, then we won't have any other specifics.
So you can make it like a tiny little carport for bicycles, something 4 feet tall and big enough for the bikes underneath and lock.
It could do that, or if you have tucked under parking, it could go in there as well. You can have a little corner, like one of those empty corners when you have 2 parking spaces in a perpendicular to each other. That could be a room.
Okay.
Sometimes I've seen them where they provide a room, like a storage room within the parking area. That could become the bicycle storage area, and always people can always bring the bicycles to the rooms. My daughter used to do that in college. She used to bring her bicycle up to her room.
Yeah. Other questions so far? Okay, if we have no other questions, let's go ahead and open the public testimony portion of the hearing. Do we have anybody on Zoom that wishes to be part of the meeting?
We do, Chairman. Kevin Tsai, please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Sure. I just have I think one question and maybe one comment. But before I start, I think city is doing the right thing and actually doing the great thing to initiate this SRO, because as you know, we're in a housing crisis and there's just not enough affordable unit out there for just an average worker to be able, and we have a lot of people are living in a parents' house, or people are living in converted garage. So SRO is definitely the alternative for many people who just have a regular job. So I commend to the city that this is actually going to be happening. I do have a question about the sizes of the SRO. It's mentioned 250 to 450, and there is a requirement for storage. So if a unit is designed where that storage is actually located outside, maybe adjacent to the unit, or in proximity where it's accessible to the unit, would that be counted toward the maximum size 450? As you know, it's not the size of the unit is too small. I think one of the commissioner mentioned that we just have a lot of baggage. We have a lot of stuff in our place. We just need more storage space. And it's in order to promote for a good tenant that want to stay there for a long time. It's, it can be a really small studio, but there's got to be need where we can actually provide tenant with storage space. I think it's a 30 cubic yard. 30 cubic is just really way too small. I would like to have the planning staff reconsider that. And second thing is, and this will be the last, if I looked at two of the sample floor plan layout, and it looks like the kitchen, both of them are extremely small. And that kind of echoed to my concern about the storage. There's not enough storage space. And for a lot of people who really enjoy cooking, that two floor plan are really just designed for hotel stay. And for people who actually work and live in those units, I think the kitchen has to be bigger. So I would actually really kind of rethink about the SRO to be slightly bigger than 450 square feet. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
I apologize. Evan Levi, please unmute your mic.
Hi, this is Evan Levy. I hope you can hear me.
By all means, please, Mr. Levy, continue.
I am the owner of Phoenix Ranch, which has been in the city for many years. We have one school at Oak Road off of Yosemite and First Street, and we have one on Cochran Street, which was the old Pinecrest. We're in the throes of moving off of Oak Road to Cochran Street for different reasons. And we have 3 parcels on Oak Road. And I sent in a letter yesterday. I'll just read a little bit of it. We have 3 parcels comprising 3.61 acres. 1.7 acres is currently zoned CBD, and 1.8 acres are medium residential. We feel that a zone change would be consistent with the neighborhood in that to the west and adjacent to us are the Yosemite Arms Apartments, zoned RH. To the east And adjacent to us is a mobile home park, and adjacent to that is the Rory Lane Development zoned RH. And across East Los Angeles Avenue to the north of us is a grocery anchored shopping center with the McKeon Condos development also zoned RH. So we are requesting that since we're basically surrounded by residential high developments, our request would seem to be consistent with the current general plan. Also, listening to Kevin Tsai, the architect, I'm not in agreement that these are extended stays. That may have been years ago. I own SROs currently, and they're 425 square feet. We built them thinking that people were going to stay 6 months, but due to high cost for housing, they are staying 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. And 450 square feet is not enough when you consider they're getting king size or queen size beds. They now have computers. They now have big screen TVs. They want a larger kitchen so that they can also cook. So there is not enough storage. And 450, I have 425 square feet and they are way too small. And so I would love to talk to somebody about that at a later date, but 450 square feet is a little small. And that's all I have to say. And I thank you for your time, and I hope you consider what I have asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. Do we have any other people to call in on Zoom?
We have Rebecca Alberon. She did not sign up for this item, but she's raised her hand, so I assume she would like to speak with the chairman's permission.
Certainly, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak once again. I definitely wanted to stay for the single room occupancy presentation. I'm a big fan of the SROs and definitely a fan of the SRO project that was approved. I believe not last year in 2020, but the Tapo Lofts. I'm patiently waiting for those to be built. I already know someone who has dibs on one of those units, so I'm definitely waiting to hear news on those. So definitely a fan of those. But I wanted to just chime in here because I know there was a question that was asked. You know, it's what are we? I think it was Commissioner Hodge who asked the question. You know, what are we providing with these SROs? And I think, you know, my answer would be that we're providing housing. And this is in respect to the question of, you know, these parking minimums. The purpose of these SROs as we're approaching them is to be able to provide affordable, secure, and safe housing, an alternative, something that's more affordable to people. That's what we're doing. That is our main goal, or should be our main goal in trying to, you know, allow for the building of SROs. It's to provide housing. It's not to house vehicles, not to provide spaces for vehicles, but to house people. That is the purpose. Given the limited land that we have in Simi Valley that can be developed, I think it's imperative that we implement smart planning. Requiring all these parking minimums, just think about what we're actually asking for. We're literally asking for these parking spaces to eat up land that frankly have better use. Yeah, you know, there is a real concern for traffic, but we really need to move away from creating car-centric developments, right? So not everyone who, you know, is barely making minimums and, or, you know, is going to be able to afford these places to live or want to live there, wants a type of lifestyle or has a vehicle that they have to maintain. The purpose and hopefully how we're approaching these SROs is that we want to provide affordable housing and not necessarily housing vehicles. I think these SRO developments are an opportunity, a really big opportunity to change, you know, the culture around housing and housing policy. And this is one good way to do it. So I really even would say that, you know, I even disagree with the fact that we even have those minimum parking requirements there. So it's just really important to think about that. Purpose, SROs house affordable, it's affordable housing for people. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? On
No
Zoom?
further speakers.
Okay. Are there any comments from staff regarding statements made during the public hearing?
Only a couple comments. I know there was a comment regarding the units being larger than 450 square feet. There's a reason why that's the limitation. When you go beyond that, now you enter a whole other type of housing, more like studios and apartments. The whole point is to stay, to be able to provide affordable housing. So if you look at all the cities that we researched, the maximum was 450, and that's why we have that. And of course, everybody would love to have a bigger kitchen and everything else. However, that will, like I said, will bring up a whole other different type of housing. And that's probably like the main thing that I wanted to point out. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
In regards to the storage, giving the comparison to other cities, this kind of falls in the middle ground of having a storage option. Because as again, this is a starting point for housing. When people come in, they're not going to be having as many items, and if they're going to want to get more storage, they'll move on to a larger type of housing option.
Okay.
Oh, and actually, one more thing that I wanted to add, that a closet is actually not even required to be provided for an apartment or building, what have you. So the storage is something that we're providing as a accommodation.
Okay. Any other comments from any staff? Do we have any further questions before we close the public testimony? Are there any comments or questions from members of the Planning Commission? Oh, let's go ahead, sorry, let's go ahead and close the public testimony part. Okay. Public testimony is now closed. Now, are there any comments or questions from members of the Planning Commission?
If I could be so.
But go ahead, Commissioner
Oh,
Tolson.
thank you, Commissioner Hodge. Yeah, I think that one, I would like to see us have our size consistent with Camarillo with 300 to 450 square feet. I'm great with the bike, the way you kind of split the difference on all the different cities as far as the one lockable bike space for every 3 units. I think that makes a lot of sense. As far as the parking is concerned, which I think is probably the biggest issue here, I agree with Commissioner Hodge that we want to make sure that we follow state. I may have mixed that up. Oops, wrong notes. But anyway, I understand the whole thing about the shared parking and how, but that still is subject to Planning Commission approval. So whatever the developer wants, and I do believe no matter what, there needs to be at least some sites that are on the project itself. So I think that the staff did a pretty good job, but if we have to meet some sort of code, as Commissioner Hodge was talking about, then I think that that's something we definitely should look into. Or actually that was on-site management, I'm sorry. So on the on-site management thing, if for other units it's 16 units and we have to have on-site or less than that, we don't need to have on-site, then that's what we should do. I think we should try to be consistent with state code as much as possible. But as far as the parking, if I had a business and I had 14 parking spaces and a SRO moved in next door and they needed 12 of those spaces, there's no way I would enter into a shared parking agreement with them. That wouldn't make any sense. So I agree with one of the last callers. I think we're really overparked, especially in many of our commercial areas. So, but since we have the final say on that, I'm not super concerned. just with the language. That's it for me.
Okay. Other commissioners, Commissioner Hodge?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Commissioner Rice that when he said he agrees with me about having the. There's a really great line in the movie Darkest Hour where Churchill says to this guy, "Stop interrupting me while I'm interrupting you." But anyway, the whole thing about requiring on-site management, I do believe that we should make it consistent with state law with respect to other apartments. There's no reason to treat these projects as needing additional services of that kind. And I agree with him that 16 and more, but let's go with the California Code of Regulations when it refers to this. So anything under 4 units there's no requirement. 4 to 15 units, you have to have this notification on how to get a hold of the owner. 16 or more units, you're supposed to have an on-site manager. I'm frankly willing to even go a little bit more on that. Just sort of to have somebody in an office or something. I wouldn't even mind seeing that requirement lessened to a degree, because it is an expensive element to the owner of the property. But I'm good with no more than that, or rather no less than what is currently required for other apartments right now. And I could go with that. But if the commission, a majority of the commission, was even supportive of a little bit less, I could probably go with a little bit less requirement as well. Either raising that number or changing the manner in which there isn't necessarily a full-time live-in manager, but some other form of office maintenance worker who doesn't necessarily have to live there. I do think that we should stick with it with 1 unit per one parking space per unit. And there's a big reason for this. A lot of these projects, if they come forward, and I hope that they do, because they're in the commercial development, commercial plan development spaces, a lot of them are going to be on arterials. They're not necessarily going to be in residential areas where you could park on the street. A lot of these places aren't going to have street parking. And we're even talking about allowing them to be across the street and all, this parking space and stuff. If we don't provide adequate parking, it's going to be, you want to have affordable housing, but you want to have a certain quality of that as well. And the quality of life of having, some kitchen space and having a full bathroom. I think these are key elements to, making these places, good housing as well as affordable housing. The 1 parking space per location. I've spoken to a number of people who said that they would love to move into something like this, and they're a young couple. And you know what? They have 2 cars. And hopefully, that won't create a problem, but I sure would, get concerned about cutting that number down below 1. And then we also have to remember that the state may in fact change that number for us, because assuming that there are affordable units included within these projects, and there easily could be, the state mandate is going to go down to a half unit. I mean, a half parking space per unit. So I'm perfectly comfortable with 1 unit parking, 1 parking space per unit as a standard. It could be any mix of on-site provision or on-site provision and adjoining property provision. And, we'll take a look at that as each of these come before us. I'm perfectly good with the 250 to 450 size, and I agree with the comment of staff that if you go bigger than 450, you're really looking at a 1-bedroom apartment, which typically is between 625 and 700 square feet in Simi Valley. So, we're trying to allow applicants or developers to build residential units for people that could be, the fair market value will be lower. If we make them bigger, it's just going to make the fair market value higher, and we're not really gaining some of the benefits that we're hoping to gain by adding this form of housing. Managers, parking, square footage. And I'd like to see the language changed so that there is no distinction of the parking requirements depending upon if they're parking on site or next door. So those are my comments.
Commissioner Gray, Tolson?
Ladies first, go ahead.
Okay, I am in agreement with almost everyone, and I apologize. I thought I was on mute. I hope I was just cracking up. That was the funniest thing. You guys cracked me up. The parking is a concern for me. I've heard over and over in the 20, almost 30 years that I've lived in Simi Valley, that projects that are fantastic are approved, and then there's very little guest parking. But then everybody ends up using the parking, and we've got a storage issue, and that's just not a Simi Valley issue. This is a storage issue throughout this country. We own more things than we probably need, but if you were talking about a 250 to 450 square foot, which was probably my first studio apartment, which again, I think this comes down to, I think it was Ms. Albaran that mentioned that this is about not housing vehicles. This is about housing people. And my first, I'm going to refer back to my studio apartment. I love that place because it was behind the Oaks Mall, and I had a view of the sunset every night that was unbelievable. And the only reason I love that tiny little place was because of the sunset. And we need to make sure that there is a balance on these that people want to live there because it's bringing them joy, in addition to having a lower income issue. I think that if the city can work out something with adjacent businesses, I think that would be fine. I am in agreement with the one parking spot per unit because we just don't need to be dealing with parking issues, especially when we're talking about, studio or an SRO. We're also, if something is built with an agreement next door, what happens when that converts to something else and now we don't have adequate parking? So that is a concern for me. I also am concerned about storage, that if a 24 cubic space is the minimum and there isn't some sort of an additional outdoor space, people have things that they need to, I'm able to park 2 cars in my garage. I don't know how, but we've also got shelving with a lot of things that I'm the antique owner of my family's heirlooms. But it's not only those things, it's things people want to go to the beach. People want, they want to go to hopefully they want to do things in our city by attending our festivals where you need chairs and things that you don't want inside your house. I think that there should still be an additional storage unit outside so that people aren't having to pay $150, $200 a month to have things that are stored, which I think that they could easily supply. Most of the places that I lived in apartments is that you pulled into your carport and that there was a little space above where the hood of your car was. It stuck out just a bit, but it gave you just enough to put those types of things. I think that we need to have additional storage. And then my last thought is if we were wanting people to be using and enjoying Simi Valley, if that is the direction that we want to take, I think that we need to have more than 1 per 3 parking or bicycle spots. I don't agree that it needs to necessarily be a covered, but it does need to be some sort of a secured space. If we can put multiple parking lock areas for children for schools, I think we can do the same things. And that would encourage people to be able to use mass transit and those types of things. But I'm 100% in agreement that we do need to encourage these SROs. Parking, storage, and bicycles is my issue on this. And that's my only comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Tolson.
You got it. Thank you very much for your time. I'm very happy with the concept of making sure that each one has the private kitchen and bath. That helps us with our RHNA numbers. The storage, I think, is fine. Again, we're looking at not a 1-bedroom apartment. We're looking at a SRO, smaller than a studio. This is 250 to 450. I think trying to keep the cost down to our developers, I think that's fine. If they need more, they're going to have a neighbor, a family member that can store the bigger stuff there. As it relates to the operations, I like the idea of 30 days plus. As it relates to larger than 450, that becomes an apartment. Leave it at 450 or smaller. The bike storage is fine, covered, and a place to lock your bike. You know, we are in California. More than likely, it's going to be a car versus a bike. But if we have enough for 1 out of 3, it's going to be a bike. That's going to be fine. In terms of the common area, I think that's fine. In terms of 300 plus the 15 per square foot, I don't think it's too excessive. The one thing I do have concerns with is the 24-hour management. I think that's been expressed earlier that if it's less than 16, probably doesn't need to have 24-hour management. In terms of the security, we were given 2 options, and one is to have 24-hour security, as in a security officer. I think that's excessive. We don't require that for other housing projects in town. I think option 2 on that page was leaving it up to staff and the individual owner, not requiring security unless they felt it was needed, or above 16 as the state requires. And lastly, with parking, you know, this is a SRO by by mandate. We're putting these things by public transit. We're putting by trains, by bus routes. So the parking, we're trying to encourage those to use those public services, which means our need for parking should be lessened. This is about housing, again, not like parking. The shared parking agreements aren't free. So again, there's costs involved with a shared parking agreement for the most part. So if you have 30 units, you need 30 parking spots. Well, if you can get away with a smaller footprint, have 10 on your property, but you have 20 in the adjacent, that becomes the 30. I think it's just the wording that people don't understand. I think the staff has got the concept right. If you have a shared parking adjacent and that has enough for the 20 spots, your property only needs 10. And that's what the shared 1 out of 3 means versus 1 out of 1 if it's an exclusive property. And so, you know, I think the parking is correct. Maybe the wording is incorrect. I think the staff has the proper concept and it'll be agreed and approved upon on each project. But to go 1-to-1 on every single project is excessive if you have a shared parking agreement adjacent, because you don't need, we're doing housing, we're not doing parking. That's my thoughts.
Okay, I'll give my comments. SROs, in my opinion, are affordable entry-level housing. Unfortunately, once we start providing parking, storage, larger kitchens, patios, balconies, view, larger common areas, we've taken away what I would consider to be the affordable component. These are entry-level, affordable. Something has to give. If we want to house the people, we're going to have to give up something. If we want to house our stuff, great. We want to have parking for our cars, great. But everything we give to cars or storage or kitchens or patios, that takes away housing the people. Off-site parking, off-site storage, off-site common areas, all those are available. They're called public storage places, they're called parks, they're called friends, family, neighbors, relatives, wherever you can store stuff. If we're concerned about housing people, we got to give up something, or they have to give up something. It's a free market society. If somebody wants the SRO without parking, without storage, without the large kitchen, without the large common areas, they're making that decision to rent that property versus renting something else. Free market society, let the free market dictate what's going to be rented and what's going to be vacant. Parking's a luxury. Bottom line is, in most cities, you pay to park your vehicles. Out here in California, we all expect to be able to park our cars for free. Doesn't really happen in most places, especially larger cities. I'm not saying we need to have paid parking like a lot of cities have. I don't think Simi has any parking meters. Other cities have them. Sometimes the meters are free. I know Ventura has a large parking structure that they put in. It's free to the people in the city. But again, it's a luxury. Parking and storage, there is no easy answer. No matter where you go, people are going to complain. Either there's too much parking because malls have vacant parking spaces, or you go to some of these smaller, newer cluster home developments and you'll drive around trying to find a parking space and guest parking because all the residents have taken up the parking because their garages are full of stuff that they don't want to pay for public storage. You house a $100,000 car outside, but yet you store $5,000 worth of stuff in your garage. Kind of befuddles me a little bit here and there. 300 square foot for exterior common areas. You know what? Bottom line is that's smaller than a two-car garage. Two-car garage, about 400 square feet. So is that enough for 10 units? I don't know. If we want to give the 300 square feet for the first 10 and then go 15 over that, common pools are not really used in a lot of neighborhoods, so I don't know how many people are going to be hanging around in the common areas, about the size of 2 parking spaces. Whether you do 300 or 400, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. I think the staff can figure that one out. Definitely on-site management. I think we don't reinvent the wheel. We keep with the state mandate. State says 16 and over, you have an on-site, 16 and under, no. Emergency procedures, security plans, I think we treat this like any other multifamily development. If you make it more restrictive, you make it more costly. You make it more costly, you make it less affordable. So I am perfectly content with the shared parking agreement. I understand the concept. If you have a large parking lot next to you, you can work in some kind of shared parking agreement that denotes a certain number of spaces that is going to allow those residents to park in that shared parking lot with unfettered access into those number of spots. If we insist on putting 1-for-1 in our parking structures, or 1-for-1 in our developments, 2 parking spaces are about the size of a unit. So if you're going to insist on 10 extra spaces, you're giving up 5 units in an SRO. Now that's 5 people that are not going to have a house. If we're talking about housing, we really got to give up parking somewhere. So I'm a fan of the shared parking agreement. I know there's a few apartment complexes in Simi that have informal shared parking agreements. I know those have a few formal ones. Bottom line is, I think if we're really going to go for affordable housing, we have to be willing to give up the parking and still make it a shared agreement so people can park a car there, but it's not necessarily on site. Those are kind of my comments. Now let's circle back to any of the commissioners have other comments that they want to say.
Chairman Mann?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not saying that there should be, if there's 30 units, there should be 31 parking spaces on the project. I'm saying there should be 31 parking spaces in combination with either on the project or on the shared parking. So either way, either exclusively on one parcel or exclusively on the other parcel or in combination with the both, we provide the 31 spaces. Now, so there could be 5 parking spaces on the project. There might be 0 parking spaces on that parcel if they can all be adequately supplied by the shared parking agreement with the adjoining parcel. I'm good with that. I have no problem with that. But in terms, we have to have at least a number that we provide on this in terms of what it is that we're looking for. And I'll go back to the comments I made before. A lot of these parcels projects are going to be on arterials like Cochrane. And if you can't find a place to park, guess what? You're sneaking a place to park, or you're walking a great long distance somewhere. And then once again, if there's going to be some affordable components to this, the state's going to cut that in half and say that's 0.5 spaces on a project. And I'm okay with that too. I mean, if that's what the state law provides, and that's what the state law provides. But, I hope that no one was suggesting that I was saying that you have to have 31 units on the parcel and that you can't have shared parking. I'm saying I'm completely good with shared parking agreements. It can be in any way, shape, or form, but in terms of the number, the demand that you're going to have, it needs to be one per unit plus the one for the manager if the manager exists. And I'm okay with not having any for guests. So I hope that the majority of the commission wants that as well. I'm perfectly good with the storage, as it is. Are a lot of people going to wish there was more? Sure, but I agree with Commissioner Mann that this is the kind of housing where those kinds of considerations shouldn't be paramount, and the idea is to keep the numbers low. I'm glad to hear that the majority of the commission is good with not requiring managers under units under 16. That will save them some money. That will affect affirmatively the affordability quotient. And so I think the only issue that it really sounds that sort of floating out there in the breeze is this question of how much parking are we going to require irrespective of where it is.
I'll be the first one. I'm good with one parking space per unit, whether it's off or on site. And if it's off site, obviously it's under a shared parking agreement. So I have no problem with one per unit, whether it's off or on site.
Plus one if needed, if there's a manager.
Plus one if there's, yes, plus one with a manager.
I could go for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to just restate that I don't think that anybody that's possibly going to be renting an SRO is got $100,000 vehicle in their parking space. And I can tell you that when I was renting a studio apartment, I didn't have, and most people I don't think would have family to store their stuff. And I do think that, yes, people should be very cognizant on their storage. But if people are going to be, like I said before, I'm in agreement that if you can get an agreement, that the city, I think, is capable of making sure that there is one parking spot per person, and if they need a requirement for a manager. However, I do think that the storage of the 24 is not adequate, and most people don't have families sitting in Simi Valley. Those that are living in Simi Valley are not necessarily just extended family members. And it is not a choice between $100,000 vehicle, because I don't know that many people that have a $100,000 vehicle that's going to be renting an SRO. So I think that we should be, at least if we're talking about storage in kitchens, making sure that the space is adequate. I think more than just a closet for your clothes, that there should be an additional, and like I said, I think that they can easily do that in a carport above, like they've done before, your parking space, so that you're not having to rent a storage unit for the things that you don't have in their 24 cubic square foot apartment. That's all.
I would like to kick in a comment on the kitchens, because I think that there seemed to be some pushback on that. If people who are going to be wanting to live in these units, if affordability is an issue, going out to eat all the time is an issue too. That's very expensive. A whole lot less expensive to eat indoors. And folks, whether we provide them with a stove or not, they're going to figure out some way to cook inside their units. It's just reality. So the idea of providing, a small little kitchen space, you call it a kitchenette, but it's got a stove and a place for a refrigerator and a sink. I think those are the basics of reasonable quality of life that folks should be able to have. And I'm hoping that we go with kitchens and with the bathroom as identified, and no shared bathrooms. My goodness. First time I saw that, I was aghast. I couldn't believe that was even a possibility. So I think I get the impression that, with the exception of the storage issue, that we pretty much all agree. And I agree with Commissioner Gray about, 24 square cubic feet is small. But at the same time, I can't, I think that recommendation could go to the council, her comment. I'm okay with the way it is now. Yeah, I very much appreciate your comments, and I think the reality of it is that even people who are just leaving their parents' home or has some problems and now they need really inexpensive housing, that even they'll have more than 24 cubic square feet of stuff that they might need to put around. But I'm okay with pretty much where we've gone so far.
Commissioner Tolson, any comments? Last thoughts?
I think we're all in agreement on most everything. If we want to move up the storage to 30 feet, I mean, that's 20% bigger.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
So Chairman Mann, if I'm trying to tally what we're talking about tonight, so we could go through each individual item, just make sure we're clear on what we're looking for.
Sure.
So Commissioner Rice's first comment was he preferred 300 to 450 square feet. Or
But I think I'm the only one, but that's okay.
so
Either way it is.
if the consensus is 250 to 450 as written, then we could mark
Okay.
that off. As far as the on-site management,
Some commissioner take note, because one of you are going to be making a motion here.
Let's make Tolson do it.
Okay. Tolson's taking notes. Okay.
so yeah,
He's gonna
so
say as amended, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Gibson.
So the square footage will not change, so there'd be no need to encourage that motion. For the on-site management, one option is on page 23 is one, you could strike out 5B, just take out 24-hour on-site management completely, as we don't have that requirement for existing apartments. You could just strike it out and just let the owner handle state law. That's one option. Or if you wanted to strike out item 5 completely, that's another option. And
Mr. Gibson, I think the problem is that are these defined as apartments by the state? And I'm not positive about that. I had that conversation earlier with Mr. Caceres, and I think that there was some uncertainty there. I think we should keep the language in our own, that 16 in the ordinance, so that there's no lack of
So
clarity.
5B just expanded to be 24-hour on-site management for projects over 16
Over
units.
16 units.
yeah, it could be over 16 units or per the state's California Code of Regulations.
So we're not sure if the state mandates that or says SROs are under that other code that mandates an on-site manager for 16 units.
I think we should just leave it at 16 units, just over 16
Yeah.
units. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
And is there a consensus on that change?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. The storage item, are we at 30 square feet, cubic feet, I mean?
I'm
Or-
good.
I'm good at 30.
That's fine.
I would like to see it increased as people, I mean, it's giving people an opportunity to be living, and again, people that can afford a 1 or 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom, whatever. 24 cubic square feet is so small, even to be able to storage anything separate that's going to be an outdoor item. People that are into recreations, they need to have something more than that. That's all my comments are on
What
that.
would you like, Commissioner Gray?
Would you be okay with 30 feet?
It's better, definitely.
Okay.
I would prefer to see something as a separate unit if we're doing carports for places that they could easily put a storage unit above, like they've done most apartments that I've ever been in. But if you can increase the storage unit and everybody's in agreement, then I would be okay with that.
I mean, I guess we can do 30 on the 250. Do we want to have a variable if they do the 450 square foot? It's a larger one.
No.
I'd
30 across the
rather
board.
we not do that.
Okay, let's just go with 30. Keep it simple.
Yeah, I mean, if the only difference between a smaller unit and a larger unit isn't necessarily the amount of people, it's whether or not you've got living space. And the larger the unit, I kind of agree that you could possibly bring in storage internally, but it's the smaller units that you just don't have any space to bring in even something that would be storage. But the larger the unit, you could. It's just, I hate people having to be forced into paying. I think what a 10 by 10 now is almost $200 a month. I mean, that's a lot of money to be storing things just so that you can be recreational. So that's my only concern. That's why I'm just increasing the size of the storage, I think is what I'm looking for.
Okay. Move on.
Okay, 30 square feet, 30 cubic feet. Commissioner Gray also referenced possibility of more bicycle parking. Is there a decision on that?
I'm comfortable with as written.
I am too.
I am too.
Okay. And the last one is parking. So what I'm hearing from some people is one space per unit, either on-site or off-site, with or without a shared parking agreement.
Plus one for a manager.
Plus one for a manager.
Correct.
I think it would definitely need to have an agreement that if you don't have the agreement, then you're talking about people either having to find parking someplace and walking a long distance. And I know that when I was
if you have
in
no
my studio,
agreement, then they have to
having-
park on site.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, if there's no shared parking agreement, the developer will have to make it on-site parking.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. And then I think there's one last thing. I agree with Mr. Tolson that I don't think that we need to have this security plan. I don't see that.
Excuse me 1 second. Can we go back to the parking? Are we not going to require guest parking at all?
No.
Correct. Okay, thanks. Sorry
And
about that.
Where do we end it with common area? Right now, it's 300 plus 15 per from the first one.
I'm okay with the way it's written, but
I fundamentally am too. I mean, because it's 450 square feet. If you do 10 units, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, rooftop or a combination of the both, no problem with that. Other commissioners?
The only thing I'm concerned about is if somebody wants to put up a small project, 8 units, they're really gonna, you got to put it. Let's make it like 10 or more units, or.
Sorry, explain that comment, please. You didn't
Well,
quite your sentence, so I didn't quite understand it. I apologize.
Sure. If somebody has a small project, to add 300 feet, to add 300 square feet plus 10 feet, 15 feet per unit, that's another 120. That's 420 square feet. That's larger. That's another whole unit of space, and, a large unit of space. So my thinking is that, somebody wants to have a small project, somebody may want to put up six units. And now you've got to add 300 square feet plus 15 times 6. It actually could be detrimental to the decision making. So I'd like to see some common space, but there should be a project that's at least large enough to support it.
I'm good.
So I would think
I'm good with a 300 up to 10 and then 15 on top of that.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement that it's again lifestyle, that it's a balance, and I think it's important for them to have that space.
Okay, so 300 up to 10, 15 for everything over 10, plus 15 over 10.
Right, I got that.
Okay. Any other changes, comments?
What was the security plan that we were talking about? Because I kind of felt like we just jumped. Was that the
There's no
somebody
we're
on
not-
site?
We're not requiring security.
That's okay.
Is that correct? My understanding?
Yeah,
I don't know. I
item
think
5.
felt like that we just kind of jumped over it, and I'm just trying to understand what exactly we jumped over so
5C,
quickly.
We're not requiring any kind of on-site security.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Motion?
Oh, where'd it go? Sorry, I just lost it.
Okay.
All right.
Resolution number SVPC 072021, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Simi Valley recommending to the City Council approval of Development Code Amendment ZS 750, amending Title IX of the Simi Valley Municipal Code to establish single-room occupancy housing unit standards and requirements, and a determination that the amendments are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act as amended.
Thank you very much for the save. Now, the chair will entertain a motion.
I move to adopt a resolution recommending approval of ZS 750 and a determination that the amendment is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act as amended.
Second.
I thought we were adding the storage to 30. That would not be as amended, that would be,
As
That would be
amended.
as amended.
We
Okay.
amended it to 30.
thank you.
So we're clear, as amended, we've changed it to 30 because the original was 24. Okay. Does everyone have a clear, concise understanding of what we're voting on? Okay. I remember to lock my vote. this time.
Commissioner Hodge?
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Tolson?
Yes.
Commissioner Gray?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Let's see. Gotta read this. There's no appeal period for the zoning text amendment, and the item will proceed to the city council with the planning commission's recommendation. Moving on to
Good
the
job,
ne-
staff and Mr. Hiddleman.
Yes,
gr-
definitely.
Great job, one and all. Thank you very much. So, next item of business I have as oral communications reports.
Yes, members of the Planning Commission, our next meeting is scheduled for May 5th. However, I don't believe we have any items for May 5th. No items, so we might get that week off. And we will update you of a couple pending items for May 19th. I believe we have one item so far for May 19th. Also, a little bit of housekeeping. I will announce to the Planning Commission that our recording secretary, Jen Dodson, will be, we are very proud of her. She's been promoted to Public Works Administrative Assistant.
Oh,
And she will be very soon leaving us from our Planning Commission. She will be filling in with Whitney Luxemberger, who's also here. In the interim, we will be recruiting a new recording secretary, but Jennifer has done an excellent job during her tenure here. We will all miss her. Hope you'll agree with me on that. And she's brought a lot to this commission, and we will miss you in this room, but we know you will be close by over in Public Works. So thank you, Jennifer. That's all I
Okay.
have.
Any commissioners have anything to report? Hang on, Commissioner Tolson, could you hold that up again?
Of course.
Oh. Okay, other commissioners have anything to report? Okay, Mobile Home Rent Mediation Board. That'd be you, Mr. Gibson.
No items tonight.
Tree Advisory Board.
No items tonight. Thank you.
Then this concludes the meeting of April 21st, 2021. Next scheduled meeting is May 5th, but it looks like we're going to have the night off, so probably not until May 19th. So, Ms. Dodson, if you're not going to be with us on May 19th, we wish you all the best in the world. Public Works' gain is our loss, but we are sure you are leaving us in the great hands of Ms. Luxembourg. So, meeting's adjourned.